A technological space emerges before our eyes. The story of this book is as follows. The towers collapsed under the onslaught of chaos, and one day the world changed dramatically. Huge Xenos attacked the inhabitants. Towers and dungeons that appeared out of nowhere began to generate monsters, and they immediately began to attack people, and the world plunged into chaos. The continents were shining with threat, and in particular the Korean peninsula, which became famous as a region where towers and dungeons appeared continuously. The subway stations were in ruins, and here the monsters were much more aggressive and stronger than in other countries. It was a real hell. The mother tried to protect her child from the monster. A huge wolf opened his mouth, preparing to attack. But then lightning pierced him, and yet even the pitch darkness can be dispelled by bright light. The mother and child looked at the savior with joy. He extended his hand to them, and in this novel, with such light. It was a man in a cloak and fingerless gloves. Heroes could destroy the darkness. The news was full of headlines, and thanks to the power of heroes, Korea began to fight monsters, and gradually people were able to take control of dungeons and towers into their own hands. The charts of countries jumped, and cataclysms were used as an engine of industry. Dawn came over the city, and gradually humanity began to emerge from the dire situation. And time passed, and Korea, along with the USA, entered the ranks of strong countries, which attracted famous heroes from all over the world. Cities flourished, and in order to prevent the emergence of new monsters and dungeons, Korea founded the best hero training center in the world, which taught advanced magic and magical technology. A hexagonal symbol appears before us, and this is how the Cube Academy came into being. The most diverse awakened appeared before us. Cadets from all over the world studied there, who were able to break through despite the high competition. The sky was crystal clear. The young man was honing his attacks and using powerful magic. Among them were the heroes who would save this world in the future. The man with the sword was emitting a powerful red aura from himself, and the guy with the spear was standing with a slight smile. These were the ones who were competing with them. This was an overview of the world situation. If you wonder how he knew all this, then this world was not invented by God, but by the person who is telling this story. But there was one problem. The sun was shining brightly above the Colosseum, and a festive atmosphere was playing. Suho approached the pedestal, and he was told that the first place among the first-year cadets was. After a short pause, the hero was handed a sheet of paper and called by name. But then, for some reason, he was overcome with anxiety. The author realized that he had ended up in his own book that he had written. The audience looked at the banner with him and admired him, and he thought about what was right before his eyes. Information about the participants was displayed on the screens. The time traveler read about the hero's name and the cadets, after which he understood exactly what world he was in. The settler was instantly seized by panic and wondered what had happened here. He heard many offensive phrases addressed to him from every corner of the arena. The protagonist focused on the people sitting around and did not move. The guy realized that he could hear everything that was said in the distance. Several human figures were visible in the distance, one of which said that all the first-year students were quite capable this year. The narrator tried to take a closer look. Among them stood a woman with brown hair and, smiling, said that Suho was among them. She put her hands on her hips and said that she could not even believe that he was only 17. The author became alarmed and thought about the name of the young genius. He imagined him and said that he was the main character in this world. Then the guy imagined a sword and said that he was a hero and the one who would lead the world where monsters ruled, namely a kind and fair one who possessed all the qualities of a hero. Immediately after, the blue-haired man appeared in his eyes as a man behind broken glass. The dark-haired man still did not move and thought that it was the one who competed with that one. Suho looked away in surprise, and the narrator continued and said that it was a cadet who took second place. In front of us stood a blonde man with luxurious golden eyes, whose name was Jonghak. This impudent guy was the grandson of an oligarch, the owner of a large company, Jisen. Looking at the golden-eyed man, the narrator immediately said that he had similar skills to the main character, and was an arrogant rich man to the core, who would become a negative character in the future. Imagining how they fight with the main character of the novel, he thought that now they were all cadets, but later the blonde, experiencing his inferiority because of the blue-haired one, will have to become a villain, and their fight will be like a fight between light and shadow. These two guys were standing in front of the column, and the narrator thought and realized that there were two main characters of the story. It seems that he definitely ended up in the world of the book. Realizing that he was watching them from the side, he realized that he did not know who he had become. And a hand reached out to him while he was thinking that if he was a character in his book, then he should at least have a name, but then he was called out. A small chubby guy turned to him and asked if he fell asleep late yesterday, and then the question arose about what was happening. The narrator, confused, asked if he was being addressed now, to which he immediately agreed with a gentle and kind look. And then an alarming thought struck him, and the hero wondered if there was another one like him. He immediately imagined a banner with that name and wondered if there was a character with that name at all. But then the guy had an idea and he thought about how he didn't remember calling anyone that and thought that maybe he would remember when he saw the face. He looked at the screen in the sky and seeing himself with a question mark on his face, he wondered who this person was. And then he had more questions than answers. The dark-haired man grabbed his face and wondered in horror why his face had become a question mark, watching the festive extravaganza and wondering what it was. At that moment, he realized that he had become a character that he hadn't written about in the book. Watching the others in the audience, he thought that this person had no appearance, no role, and his name was kind of old-fashioned. Yahello clutched his face and thought that even his presence was somehow unclear, and without a face no one would pay attention to him. Imagining himself against the backdrop of the main characters, he thought about the fact that he was only called a cadet, and he had no friends, and he was the one who had no points of contact with the main characters. The reincarnated one tucked his legs and thought that he was just a character to fill the audience seats. The dark-haired man covered his face and finally realized who he was. There were many such unremarkable personalities sitting around him, and he thought that he had become an episodic character outside the plot. But then an even greater truth dawned on him. The author, realizing the scale, thought that he had become dust inside the book. One day, he received a message. The dark-haired man was surprised by the strange glow and wondered what it was. He received a letter asking to make a remake of his work. He immediately imagined the cover of his book and thought that the sequel to his book The Return of the Hero had not been published for 6 months due to stagnation in the creative process. The author sat down at his laptop and anxiously wondered if that person wanted to make a remake of a novel that had stopped being published, and thought that there were still weirdos in the world. But then something interesting caught his attention. The letter thanked him for his interest, and Hajin said that he even felt awkward in front of him, and he did not even think that the answer to the request of a strange fail. The hero sent the letter by mail, and while particles were flying out of his dorm, he realized that this would cause the subsequent events. Water splashed. The protagonist looked in the mirror with surprise and said that he had been looking at this face for 2 weeks and even got used to it a little. Looking again at his reflection in the water, he thought that this strange question mark was also 2 weeks old, and it seems that this is not a dream. The transported one imagined the many pages of the work he was walking through, and thought that he was in the world of the book he had written, and Yahello, whose body he had entered, was one of the many episodic characters in this book. Standing in front of the mirror, the guy thought that over the past 2 weeks he had tried a lot of methods, but still could not figure out who, how, and why had placed him here. Having imagined the main characters, the protagonist thought that he might have to stay in this world for a long time. Holding onto the edge of the sink, the hero thought that by the time the plot reached the point where the release of chapters had stopped, he had about 10 more years. And then the dark-haired man exhaled heavily in horror. His face expressed extreme indignation and he wondered how he could spend so much time in the book and also wondered if he would have to laugh with teenagers all this time. The guy immediately imagined his work supplies and thought that he had his own life and did not want to stay in this book forever, trying to survive. The protagonist held his hands on the sink until a star hit the back of his head and said meaningfully. The dark-haired man began to get up little by little and thought that he needed to figure out a way to get back, and now nothing came to mind except following the main plotline. Remembering his book, the hero thought that if he reached the middle of the story, then the chapters would stop coming out anyway. The author took a towel and thought that he needed to try to hold on for a while. But then he remembered the cover of his book and said with anxiety that for this he would have to. Looking out the window and seeing a thriving city, the hero said that he needed to go to Cup School. Imagining that location, he thought that this place was located on an artificial island near the Eastern Sea, and about 5,000 cadets, including future heroes, were studying at the academy. It was a high-tech city where magic, advanced industry, and talented personnel from all over the world were concentrated, and thanks to the academy, Korea was called one of the most powerful and influential countries in the world. He stood holding his backpack with anxiety and thought that this was the center of the city and the main stage where the plot of his book unfolded. In front of him was the Hero Training Center. The guy imagined strong warriors surrounded by energy and said that among those who hoped to become a hero and had special skills, only a small part of the elite could study at this place. Looking at his hands, the hero thought that the owner of this body was also a cadet. As he continued to walk and squeeze his hand, he thought that he didn't know what skills he had, but it must have been something special to be able to get in here. The protagonist began to worry even more and thought that whatever it was, he hoped that these abilities would help him. When he approached the door and raised his head, he thought about surviving in this terrible school. Entering the classroom, he found many students sitting at their desks. The guy got into the truth classroom, which was the central place in the club. One of his classmates began to yawn, and he thought that this was a place where there were positive and negative characters. Looking at the other part of the classroom, the hero thought that there were also allies and rivals there. But when he saw Suho smiling, he immediately thought that this was the main character of the book. Looking at his comrades, the guy realized that they would soon begin to form groups, which would entail various events. Hadun sat down and thought about how he would have to be with them for 10 years, and without a face, and then thought about how lonely he was. He arrived at his dorm in the late afternoon. Entering the house, the guy said that he did not even notice how the days passed. While the hero was climbing the stairs, he noticed something while thinking about how he could study all day in high school. There was a huge box from the academy on his desk. The guy began to remove the tape, asking what kind of package it was, thinking that he was not told that something should arrive. Almost removing the tape, he thought that these were Hadun's personal belongings. But then something really surprised him. His laptop from the real world was there. The hero hurried to open it and wondered what he was doing here. The system began to slowly load. Synchronization began. He covered his hands with bright light, not understanding what was happening. The system showed 2 images with the transition from Hadun to Hajin. The settings began loading, and immediately after that, a lot of status windows flew out. The protagonist immediately remembered how he worked behind him in Earl and thought that this was the same settings log that he himself created. The guy extended his hand a little forward and wondered who could have sent him such a thing. But then something suddenly stopped him. The core began to crack and emit energy after the synchronization was 99% complete. And then the laptop unexpectedly turned off. A notification appeared about receiving a unique right to change the settings. The crack went through the space itself. Suddenly, the hero took his image from the real world. He was wildly surprised, and then a notification appeared about resetting all indicators for the purpose of synchronization. And while he was trying to come to his senses, a notification appeared about the completion of synchronization. He immediately grabbed the lid of the laptop. There was a reflection, and the guy immediately said that this was his real face. The dark-haired man looked around and wondered what had happened and where it all came from. Looking at the notification, the guy began to gradually guess what was happening and suggested that it could be an epiphany. Hajin imagined a person with an aura and said that this is an awakening phenomenon that occurs when one overcomes one's own boundaries, and in this world such a phenomenon is called an epiphany. He imagined his body with statistics and said that after it, one can see one's abilities, techniques and skills in numbers, and also become stronger in a much more effective way than before. His report card appeared in front of him, and the reincarnated man thought that, to put it simply, he now sees a status window. A window about the observation and viewing skill appeared, and then information about variables and static indicators appeared. The dark-haired man swiped his finger across the screen and said that first you need to look at each indicator. Synchronization and reset immediately caught his eye. The newly minted member of the story became more serious and thought that he did not know what it was. But because of this, his face changed, and he became weaker than the former owner of the body, but the indicators increased. He looked straight ahead and thought that the next thing that bothered him was. Looking at his unique right to change the settings, Hajin wondered what it was. Looking at the bottom item, which said that as Hajin's importance in the world grows, he receives SP, and the hero immediately said that he did not remember having such a skill and wondered about the importance. The gray-eyed man was immediately surprised and wondered if he really needed to increase his importance in this book. Remembering the battles with dungeon monsters, the protagonist immediately thought about whether it was possible that he was given his laptop back and given abilities so that he could join the plot of this story. The hero moved his hand to the side and wondered what kind of nonsense this was, and at that moment a blue window appeared. It said about the undisclosed information of the main story. The dark-haired man frowned and asked if he would have to interfere with this story to return to his home world. He immediately sat down at the table. The guy started looking for something on the laptop and thought that even if he had to wait until the plot stopped, it was not a fact that he would get out of here at all. Remembering his characters, the author thought that if this hidden information did not help him in any way, then perhaps he would be able to find some kind of clue while communicating with the main characters. He selected the investment of points in the window and thought that he needed to become stronger in order to withstand the conditions of the main plot. The guy immediately clicked on the pop-up window and said that his book had no concept of leveling up, and you couldn't increase your stats at will, and the only way was with points, which were considered very valuable here, and for the most effective way to use them. He imagined a casino and thought about investing in luck. After that, the author imagined everyday things where luck was used and said that it could be obtained not only by opening unknown rewards in the dungeon, getting money, extra points, personal relationships, and so on. It was an ability that could be used in everyday life. The hero looked straight ahead and thought that of course, the constant luck stats couldn't be increased, but he could exchange them for SP. He started typing and suggested that he should try exchanging 10 points for SP. The protagonist invested 9,000 story points in luck, increasing it almost to the maximum. And then the mysterious luck was applied. The dark-haired man was immediately surprised. The monitor said that it was used and that the indicator would increase by 0.1. And the reincarnated man was immediately surprised that it affected this too. He leaned back in his chair and put his finger to his nose and thought that the main character's magical powers were about 9, which meant that he was very lucky. Gray-eyed began to enter new values and thought that he needed to invest the remaining SP in patience because he had to endure training in Cub. And when the hero invested points, then a huge luck was applied and patience increased from 6.6 to 7.207, to which he said that he had become lucky after all. But suddenly artifacts began to appear on the matrix. A warning popped up that an error was detected that could affect the probability of increasing the indicators, which made Hajin furious. The next inscription said that he could no longer change SP using unchangeable points. The hero immediately became disappointed, asking what kind of mockery this was. He again sat back in his chair, upset, and said that there were restrictions on tricks, but he still managed to increase luck and patience, and this was already a lot. But then something caught his attention. Looking at the window of the special right, he said that he had another 10,000 points. The dark-haired man leaned back once more and fell silent. It was clear outside, and the guy said that he needed to think about how to use them. The doors to his class were open and someone was saying that they all tried hard at the morning training. Hajin was listening attentively to the lectures, and their teacher decided to introduce himself. The man in glasses put his hands on his hips and said his name, saying that he would be their instructor for the whole year. The cadets talked among themselves, discussing their places in the world rankings, while the hero sat silently. Suhaik calmly looked at them and said that it was time to stop talking about him and get down to business. He imagined a pyramid and said that Cub is not a place for entertainment, and if they do not achieve the main goal, high grades, they will begin to lag behind. According to statistics, less than half of the cadets graduate from the academy without ever repeating a year. The white-haired girl looked without emotion, and he continued and said that heroes are raised here, which means they will be assessed according to strict criteria. The brutal man nodded sternly and told everyone to stand up and follow him, because the first thing they will do is determine the main weapon. The teacher put his hand to the sensor. A heavy door began to open in front of the protagonist's face, and the contents surprised him. It was the armory, which was all glowing with neon and shining. There was a wide variety of choices, for example, katanas. In another row, axes and spears lay nearby. But then the instructor put his hand behind his back and began to shout that he did not give them time to admire and told them to choose faster. When Suho grabbed the katana, the brutal man with glasses mentioned that the chosen weapon cannot be changed for 6 months, so he should think carefully. The blue-haired man looked at his blade with a soft smile. A woman's hand raised a bow. She pulled it, knocking an arrow and pointing it to the side. A beautiful white-haired lady picked up a rapier. A dark-haired girl picked up a whip and immediately pulled it. Our protagonist looked at them calmly and thought that all the main characters made their choice without any problems. He leaned over the safe and thought that it was his turn to choose. The gray-eyed man looked ahead and the thought came to him that he needed to think carefully. Having examined the naginata and spear, the guy thought that with his indicators, he would not be able to stop at the weapon that the other cadets use. After examining the shields, the hero thought that even if he wanted to increase them, the efficiency of investing points would only fall, so he had several conditions for the main weapon. Hajin looked to the side and thought that he should have experience using it in the real world, and he should quickly adapt to it. And then his hand itself reached for the right option. The other cadets looked at him with great surprise and called everyone to look. Even their instructor, seeing this, strongly thought that he was joking. Suhaik widened his eyes in surprise and immediately turned to the hero with a question about whether he would really take this weapon. In the hands of the protagonist was a Glock 19. The hero stood in the center of the hall, holding a pistol in his hand. Suhaik looked intently at the document and told the cadet that, as he remembered, he used the sword in the cadet school. The guy, looking at him, explained that he decided to change the weapon. A question was heard, and for this he entered the cube. An agreement in response. The man looked at him over his glasses and agreed, saying that in the cube, the choice is always up to the cadets. Crossing his arms, Suhaik shouted that it doesn't matter whether it's the right choice or not, the responsibility lies only with you. Let them keep that in mind. Hajin looked at him silently. He looked away, hearing someone say that he's completely crazy. The classmates around him were whispering, asking why he entered the cube if he chose a gun. It's not clear. He'll have to do it during sparring. Maybe he wants to attract attention to himself. Touching his burning ear with his fingers, Hajin thought that even in this world, a gun is the best weapon, especially for an ordinary person who doesn't know how to use magic. A bullet flew out of the gun, leaving a trail of lightning. Magic bullets are mainly used here. They are much stronger and more destructive than simple steel bullets since they contain mana. However, despite this, guns are not very popular. The bullet rushed forward. The man waved his hand, deflecting the bright flash. The metal part on the student's glove was smoking. The instructor behind him was calling the next cadet. No matter how strong the owner, the gun already has a certain destructive power. This is the first reason. Ancient symbols were painted on the wall. And the second reason is that the gun does not have any deep and significant history of origin. Imagining a fresco with a man watching a dragon, the hero thought that in this world there are myths and legends, as well as artifacts from these legends. The warrior on horseback raised his sword. The longer and deeper the history of a weapon, the higher its rank. The blade glowed next to the outstretched palm. Therefore, the cadets of the Cuba generally preferred not modern weapons, but those with their own history. They believed in their strength and did not rely only on magic bullets, all for the sake of becoming at least one step higher, even if they reached the limit of their capabilities. Looking ahead, Hajin thought that naturally, it had nothing to do with him. He walked down the hallway, thinking that he was not some kind of comic book protagonist. He had never held a sword in his life, so there was no comparison between him and the other cadets. The guy looked at the metal case in his hand and thought that maybe a gun wasn't such a bad choice. He could handle it right now. Plus, it was a great way to earn points. Looking to the side, the guy thought that since he had chosen a weapon, he now needed to acquire an ability. An ability was a skill that could easily be called a supernatural ability. The blade was surrounded by a blue glow. The katana was attached to a sheath on the person's thigh. Usually, everyone is given one ability, but there are exceptions. The blue-haired guy walked down the hallway with a katana in its sheath, the owner of an undisclosed skill and the revealed skill of the Suho swordsman. Naeun held a bow in her hand. Hearing his question, did she also come to train? The girl frowned irritably and asked, what else is the training hall for? And he is also an elite. Suho awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said that there are usually just few people here after school. Coming closer, he remembered that another shooter appeared in their class. The girl asked again, Hajin or whatever his name was. The guy confirmed. Naeun wrinkled her nose in displeasure and her friend asked, what's wrong with your face? In response, he heard that she did not recognize him as a shooter. She remembered the image of a serious Hajin and said, what kind of shooter is he with a gun that has a firing range of 1 kilometer? Exhaling, the girl turned her gaze and said that he simply refused to be a hero. If you leave the academy early, there will not even be a record of expulsion. Perhaps this is what he is trying to achieve. He heard a question, how did he refuse? Naeun looked at the guy. Looking at her, Suho said, you shouldn't throw such words around. The archer turned around with displeasure, looking at him questioningly. The blue-haired man smiled sweetly at her. The girl was furious and shouted at him not to tell her what to do. She didn't want to hear it from him. The blue-haired man apologized in surprise. The girl shouted that if he didn't let her train, then she should leave. His fingers touched his ear. Hajin rubbed his ear in dismay, thinking maybe someone was talking about him. If only gossip wasn't included in SP. He sat with his arms crossed in front of his laptop, thinking that the main character Suho would become the best hero just because of this skill, which meant that abilities were very important. On the screen was a description of the unique right to change settings, which allowed editing or creating skills or products, as well as points and abilities. By spending SP, the hero thought that there was also the first ability that could bring 10,000 SP. He couldn't miss such a chance. The sniper skill appeared on the screen, allowing him to handle ranged weapons well, and the guy decided that he should try it first. The system reported that he used 10,000 SP to create the skill. Hajin's eyes reflected the laptop. He asked in surprise, so he was fixing everything himself. On the screen was a purple window describing the permanent sniper skill, average level, growing type, mastery level 10, mastery points 0%. The skills were listed. Bullet time, every 4 hours, 3 seconds are allocated to use bullet time in real combat. Marksmanship, wields any ranged weapon. Foresight, the ability to see far and predict the route of the object. He imagined a bow with several arrows and thought that any ranged weapon was not bad. He would be able to use not only a pistol, but also a bow. The guy thoughtfully touched his face, thinking that on top of everything, the growing skill. Now the level is not too high, but he will be able to develop it, and that's a plus. In the long run, it was even better. He reached his hand towards the keyboard, saying that great, he would choose this. Stretching, Hajin said that he seemed to be ready now. Blooming, he thought that he had only to hold on to his abilities, until the main plot of the book ended. The cadets walked along the paths near the tall buildings. A woman stood at the lectern in the classroom, saying that there weren't many small problems, but they needed to pay attention to the examples of clearing the tower and the dungeon. Hajin ran his finger across the screen of the tablet, thinking that just a few illegible lines, but it turned out to be a whole textbook. The woman pointed to the question on the screen, what is the reward for clearing the tower by the Holy Apostle Guild? The answer appeared, that the Holy Apostle Guild cleared the sea tower and received the sea stone. The guy thought that if the main characters found out about this, they would cry tears of blood. Thanks to his skill of observation and viewing, he listened to this lesson in its entirety. He imagined the silhouettes of people in the room and thought that he was literally watching and watching. He could hear their words, what they were saying. He was just amazing. He was just lucky. And this Kim Suho was a handsome man. Didn't she think so? Hajin thought that he could watch those in his field of vision, and even look through smart watches. He remembered the image of the article with the description window and the planet and thought that he could open the settings tables without any means at any time. The teacher's voice was heard that they should review what they studied today. After all, they know that there is very little time left before the exam. Naeun sat with her chin resting on her hand. Finally, she lost her patience and clasped her hands and shouted, "Why should they study this nonsense? After all, it is enough to demonstrate the abilities in a real battle." At this moment, the door to the office opened. The man who entered shouted to the students of the truth class to go to the square in 20 minutes. Naeun froze with an enthusiastic wide smile. Yona and Jonghak turned their attention to the speaker. Words were heard that this was a real combat training. Hajin awkwardly leaned on his hand and thought that this moment had come. The silhouettes of the cadets were standing on a round platform. Words were heard that they hoped that they all knew what kind of lesson this was. Accordingly, they would skip the introduction and immediately proceed to the formation of teams. Introducing the figures of the participants with weapons, the teacher said that each team would have 4 people, 2 warriors, 1 shooter and 1 assistant. The blonde girl listened along with the others that if nothing happened, the teams would be in this composition until the midterm exam. Each team would include both low-level and high-level cadets so that it would be fair. Suhaik, with a tablet in his hand, announced that in order to avoid unrest, he would immediately say that they should get used to their team. So now they will check who got where. Hajin's eyes widened in surprise. He looked at the written names and thought that it couldn't be. Gritting his teeth in displeasure, the boy thought that he was on the same team as her. On the screen, there was a list of the team members, which included Hajin and Yonha. Staring at the screen, the boy smiled wryly and thought that he was on the same team as Yonha. It was always like this in books. He imagined the figure of the boy surrounded by many silhouettes, and thought that the main character was surrounded by numerous characters who encountered him, talked to him, and got into the same stories. And among all these characters, strands of dark long hair flew up. The girl looked forward confidently. Yona was special. The hero imagined the guild logo and thought that she was the successor to the #1 best Korean guild, the Strait of Essence, as well as the heir to a famous clan. At the beginning of the book, she was at odds with Suho. The hero imagined their hands holding each other and thought that she then fell under his influence and became a reliable ally. Looking at the long-haired girl's back, Hajin thought that this is why Yona is a very important character. The more often he is involved in the story of the book, the more points he can earn. Resolutely clenching his fist, the brunette thought that today during training he must definitely find a way to get her attention. Yona turned around when she heard someone greet her. She saw a guy in a hood who said that they were on the same team. It was Hosung, next to whom stood a green-haired girl with pigtails, Heizuki. The girl looked at them indifferently, and a pattern appeared in her head. This is a team member, yes, so it cannot be ignored. Smiling sweetly, Yona said, "Very nice, Mr. Hosung, Miss Heizuki." The guy thought, they are the same age, why is she so formal? Turning around, the long-haired girl asked, "Where is the other one?" Words were heard that it was him. Hajin confidently walked towards his teammates. Yona said with an inscrutable face, "He." Looking at her, the hero thought that he should not mumble. She dislikes insecure people the most. Hosung looked at him with admiration and exclaimed that he was the one who chose a gun for himself. With a wide smile, he said that he had managed to become famous among the freshmen. A gloomy man appeared behind him and asked in a frightening voice, "Do they have time to chat?" The frightened cadets turned to the stern Suhaik. Near the light building, his cry was heard that he had sent the location of the monsters that the teams would have to fight to the smartwatch. Let them begin. The bright sun illuminated the grass by the seashore. The sun's rays flickered between the yellowish blades of grass. The 3 heroes quickly ran across the field. A map with an arrow appeared above the smartwatch on the wrist. Turning around, Yona said that they would soon be there, let them get ready. Looking at Heizuki, she said that they could look up the information about the monsters when they got there. Hajin bent down, thinking that it was possible to die. He was exhausted and sweaty from running, thinking that his physical abilities were above the level of an ordinary person, and he was just dragging himself behind them. Hosung with an axe confidently ran forward. Heizuki, focused, did not look tired. The hero thought, is this the average level of the cube cadets? Stopping, Yona looked ahead and said that they were there. This is the training ground, beach number 8. A small boat was floating in the sea ahead. A purple tentacle appeared. A ghost monster. The monster struck the water with its large tentacle. A black humpbacked octopus. The heroes watched as the octopus splashed in the water, approaching them. Standing on the shore, Yona suggested that they start discussing their plan. A diagram of an octopus appeared from her watch. She said that it was a low-ranking monster, a black humpbacked octopus. It did not have such a strong attack power. The growths on the monster's body were marked with colors on the diagram. She explained that the problem was in its hump above its head. Black creatures were rapidly spreading from the monster. When it senses danger approaching, babies emerge from this hump and suddenly attack the enemy. Several dozen blood-sucking octopuses fly out at a time, and each of them is capable of turning an ordinary person into a mummy in 1 second. Hosung looked at the projection and said that as soon as the battle begins, first of all, it will be necessary to destroy these babies. Heizuki added that if it is necessary to cope with several dozen, then Hajin, who is a shooter, should try. Yona said that no, she will take on the octopus babies herself. The boy glanced sideways at the shooter, hearing her tell him to step back and conserve his magic power. The black octopus has a very fast recovery speed. He needed to destroy its hump with one blow. Hajin looked at the girl in surprise, thinking that she was trying to exclude him from training. Turning to the hero, Yona asked, "Is everyone ready?" With a serious look, she sternly said that they would proceed with their plan. The hero looked at her darkly, thinking that she was a pest. The tentacle strike smashed the floating ship. The monster grabbed the cracked boat. The axe hit the rock, breaking it. Hosung raised his weapon, attracting the attention of the monster. He rested the axe on the stone, standing in a confident pose. Looking at the monster waving its tentacles, he thought that he should first lure it to the shore. The octopus's horizontal pupil trembled. A huge splash of water rose. The guy tensed up, seeing an approaching shadow under the water. Raising a wave, the monster was approaching. Looking with a burning eye, it climbed to the shore, forcing the guy to run away. Team, the training fight with the monster has begun. Opening his mouth, Hosung ran away from the shore. Heizuki anxiously touched the hilt of the sword. Hajin, blue with horror, held a gun. But Yona moved forward with a determined look. It has begun. The purple hump on the monster's body trembled. A bright flash appeared and many cubs flew out of it. Hosung turned around and said with a grin that he was already bursting. Many small monsters were flying above the guy with the axe. Between the tentacles was a round-fanged mouth. The guy turned around, running away from the octopus babies. Gritting his teeth, he looked at them. A swift movement of the whip. Yona chopped the monsters with sharp movements. Flashes of its babies remained against the background of the octopus. The wind fluttered the confident girl's hair. Sitting, Hosung looked at her and thought, "This is power." Ranker Yonha, who took 7th place when entering the cube. The blue-haired girl calmly looked ahead. Running further from the shore, the guy with the axe thanked her. The growth on the monster's head became larger again. The heroine swung the whip. The octopus became furious when she hit it. It reached out with its tentacles to her. They dug into the ground, forcing the heroine to jump back. A small octopus appeared behind. It spread its tentacles, opening its mouth. Heizuki saw it in fear and screamed, warning Yona of the danger. The long-haired girl froze, noticing it. She turned around to face the approaching toothy monster. Suddenly, it shattered into pieces before reaching her head. The shell fell to the ground. Hajin, kneeling, clutched the gun. His face was determined, and smoke was coming from the barrel. Yona turned around indignantly and called out to him. Hajin looked at her silently. Silhouettes of heads surrounded the hero's head. SP, which can be exchanged for stat points, increased every time Hajin's importance in this world increased. Like a small ball, he was squeezed among the large heads of the characters, taking up all the space. However, from the very beginning, he was outside the plot, so it was difficult for him to expect high value. The hero imagined a light haze, thinking that, accordingly, he had only one option to personally intervene in the events that the main characters of the book go through. Just like now, Yona turned to the guy holding the gun. Heizuki opened her mouth in surprise. Hosung turned around, calling out to Hajin. While the octopus towered gloomily, the girl indignantly exclaimed that she told them not to interfere. The hump on the monster's body burst, scattering many cubs. Baring their round mouths, they flew forward. Cursing, the girl clenched her teeth in displeasure. Hajin sat on the ground while the tentacles approached him and thought that there were several dozen monsters here. Their intelligence was so low that their trajectory of movement was clearly traced. The guy closed his eyes, concentrating, and thought that there would definitely not be a second chance like this. He opened his eyes wide, frowning ahead. The monster's body turned green. The hero used bullet time. Imagining a clock shattered by a shot, the hero thought it was a skill he had created. When used, time slows down for 3 seconds. The monster's cubs seemed to be painted in a negative range. Many small monsters were flying away from the large octopus. This meant that for 3 seconds he would be able to see where these creatures were moving. And then it was a matter of technique. He just had to shoot them. Hajin resolutely squeezed the gun, firing. The seconds began to count down. Bright traces of bullets pierced the bodies of the monsters. One of the bullets flew straight into the round mouth. The seconds passed, the shells fell down. Hajin inserted a new clip and aimed again with a stern look. The seconds melted away, coming to an end. Yona turned around, surrounded by bright flashes of monsters shattered by bullets. 0 seconds. The bullets pierced the octopus's bodies, leaving a bright trail. They flew in the other direction as well. The girl froze against the bright light. Her gaze was surprised. The growth on the monster's head trembled. The swift whip approached it and wrapped several times around the vile hump. Pulling the whip, Yona shouted for the others to attack. Heizuki and Hosung soared into the air, approaching the monster. The guy swung his axe with a smile. The girl took out her katana from its sheath. Flying from above, they prepared to attack. Behind the gloomy Yona, Hajin continued to shoot at the small monsters. A bright blow cut the monster's body. Struck by the bright red rays, it began to dive into the water. The tentacle flew up. As a result, the octopus with a crushed head lay on the shore. Breathing a sigh of relief, Hajin thought, did they destroy them? The long-haired girl turned her attention to him. The hero fell tiredly to the ground, saying how hard it was. A loud beep was heard. The results of Team 5 were being counted. Hosung held the purple octopus, saying that it had returned to its original size. Looking at the guy, Yona was silent and listened to the total time of Team 5 being 58 minutes 58 seconds. They were currently in 16th place. Hajin was breathing heavily, putting his hand on his forehead. The fight with the monster was over. Information appeared. Team 5, total time 58 minutes 58 seconds. 16 out of 100. The girl looked at the number 16. Yona's eyes widened in shock, as if pierced by lightning. The team rankings were on the screen. A voice was heard saying that the video of this battle was filmed by a drone. It would come to the smartwatch, let everyone analyze it for themselves. The long-haired girl clenched her fists until she was shaking, thinking, only 16th place. So she heard everything correctly then. Personal achievements will still be assessed separately. She looked at the blonde girl sitting in front of her with a bored look and thought, why did Naeun overtake her? The second team, Naeun and 3 others, the rating is 4 out of 100. Looking sideways at the white-haired guy, Yona thought that she was trying to close the gap between their teams. Is this all she can do? Jonghek, crossing his arms, looked to the side. The blue-haired girl noticed that he was looking at Naeun sitting in the row below and clenched her teeth. Her palm slapped the table. Yona resolutely moved towards her classmate. She noticed a gloomy figure looming over her. Immediately, Yona with a sweet smile hugged her friend from behind. Calling out, the girl recognized her. Standing next to her, the blue-haired girl asked how her practical lesson went. Did it go well? The girl answered that she was in 4th place, which was a pity. Jonghak and Rachel really wanted to win. And her. Yona awkwardly answered that she was in 16th place, but mentally she was gnawing on her whip, furiously exclaiming, how annoying. Surprised, her friend pointed her finger at Hajin, saying that 16th place with that shooter was cool. It was good that at least it didn't drag them down. Yona looked at the yawning hero and mentally repeated, it drags them down. It was definitely because of him that they spent 50 minutes getting to the place when it could have been done in 10. Although, on the other hand, his contribution to the battle with the monsters was significant. Hajin touched his burning ear, thinking that it seemed like someone was discussing him. The girl remembered the monster and thought that several dozen babies that crawled out of that octopus, it destroyed them before they even reached the ground. And this is with ordinary magic bullets. She remembered how Hosung happily slapped the stunned guy, telling the shooter that thanks to him they did it easily, and Hizuki exclaimed that it was amazing. Seriously looking ahead, the long-haired girl wondered who he was. A loud scream was heard. Tired Hajin was lying on the floor of the training room, breathing heavily. Scratching his head, he looked at the laptop and said that due to training, he was unable to check the notification. How much has he grown? The system reported that he used luck. The enemy is a low-level monster, so the accuracy of hitting the target increases dramatically. All hits were accurate. Skill mastery increases by 20%. Sensitivity increases by 0.03. Notifications appeared on the laptop screen that he had used luck. Now it would be a little better to see and hear. SP indicators increased by 27. Hajin remembered how the girl turned to him in surprise and thought that today during training he had used luck as he expected. And he had also increased the indicators. It was not for nothing that he had interfered with Yona's plan. Thanks to exercise, he had also increased other indicators quite well. The system reported that thanks to exercise, muscle strength, endurance, and health increased by 0.02. Mana is miraculously absorbed into muscle fibers. Muscle strength, endurance, and health increased by 0.03. The guy touched his fingers to the keyboard and thought that all this was due to inspiration and luck. Standing up, he took a bottle and thought that since the indicators had increased so much, he had enough of training for today. He looked at the exercise machines, thinking maybe he should go back. The light was on in the house with the traditional roof. On the door was a sign with the name Yonha. The girl sat at the table with her arms crossed, using a laptop. On the screen were shots of a guy shooting. The bullet quickly pierced the monster. The finger abruptly pressed the space bar, stopping the recording. Looking at the monitor in surprise, Yona thought that it was 2.76 seconds until this moment. Here he fired 60 times from this gun. The girl waved her hand, as if aiming a gun, and thought, I wonder, is it possible to pull the trigger 20 times in 1 second? Or maybe there is a continuous fire button. Imagining the image of the shooter, she thought that his reaction was not like the others. But his health is low compared to other cadets, and he suddenly changed his weapon. There are too many weird things about him. The smartwatch on the girl's wrist lit up while she was wondering why she hadn't seen him at the military agent academy. Turning her hand, the girl saw that she had received a message from Jonghak. The guy was asking what she was doing. Yonha looked at the message with a sweet smile. She replied that she was analyzing the video. The blonde looked at his wrist and said that he was messing around again. The girl's message said that if she wanted to take over the guild later, she had to learn to spot capable personnel in advance. Jonghak leaned on the rubble in the training room, typing a message. Where did the capable personnel in her team come from? Only scum. By the way, how is that guy with the gun? Yonha chuckled. With her feet up on a chair, she laughed sweetly, saying that he pretended not to be interested, but he asked. After all, there was something cute about him. Her message said that he could handle one task. His abilities were exactly at the level of 934th place. Jonghak wrote, maybe she was lucky with him. The girl gloomily looked away, saying, lucky. In the city, there was a tall, twisted building of the office of the Creators Grace Guild. On the table was a nameplate with the name Seung-ah, the deputy head of the guild. Words were heard that the visit to the guild was scheduled for Friday in 2 weeks. The girl with the folder heard the deputy chief agree and suggested taking a better look at it. On the screen was a smiling Suho. The girl in the chair turned and asked that there was something about him, didn't he think so? This was Seung-ah, the deputy chief of the Creators Grace Guild, ranked 307th. On the screen, the guy was chopping up a monster in flight. The woman continued that his smooth movements were like the flow of water, and his sharp sword technique was unmatched by any modern technique. The blue-haired man on the screen was looking forward. She continued that it was like dancing with swords. Seung-ah crossed her arms and spoke of this extraordinary force with which he cuts. It seemed as if he was chopping not just a monster, but space itself. Suho stood half-turned, as if surrounded by a halo. The woman said that the Strait of Essence, the Red Moon, recognition of cold. Now it makes sense why the big guilds in Seoul were trying to get him. Holding the document, Seung-ah said sweetly that she would like to take him with her. It doesn't look like he's already in any guild. The cursor moved to the next image. The deputy head summed up that, in general, they would keep him in mind. The next cadet. The brunette's eyes widened in surprise. She said to wait. Hajin on the screen was resolutely squeezing the weapon. Seung-ah asked, so he uses a gun. The assistant standing next to him confirmed, saying that the guild community was also talking about him a lot. Thanks to the fact that he ended up on the same team with Yonha, many people saw this video. The guy on the screen was focused. Words were heard that this was not even an automatic rifle, but he fired 60 shots in 3 seconds. Of them, 59 hit the target. The bullets pierced the monsters with bright beams. The man continued that even if he had excellent reaction and pulled the trigger, a regular gun simply could not withstand it. On the screen was an image of Hajin standing. The voice said that he was behaving quite eccentrically. At the academy they called him a heretic. The woman thoughtfully heard that as soon as he entered the cube, he changed his main weapon of the sword to a pistol and said what this insight meant. She imagined many different weapons. Insight, awareness of one's own abilities, special skills. Before insight, it is impossible to know about one's abilities, so sometimes there are those who change their main weapon since it does not coincide with their skills. The instructor with a pointer shouted something to the students, in which case career growth begins to lag behind by 3 years. At the academy, cadets were advised to use different weapons. Crossing her arms, Seung-ah said that insight at 17, he develops quite quickly. But if he is limited to one pistol, then there is nothing unusual about him. Sitting in the chair, she said, be that as it may, we should take a closer look at him too. Are there any free scouts now? The assistant answered that of course not. This time there are many outstanding individuals. Everyone is very busy now. The deputy head nodded, saying that then they will leave him for now. If he is a diamond in the dirt, he will start to sparkle on his own. The light of the screen reflected in her eyes. She said that it will soon be clear whether he is a heretic or not. At this time, Hajin was sleeping, hugging the pillow sweetly. Wednesday, Suho was clutching a sword in his hand. The guy swung his fist with a grin. The opponents clashed in the attack. The day of one-on-one training fights. The instructor watched with a whistle as 2 students fought. One-on-one fights were held in teams, each of which consisted of 2 cadets. Rachel thrust her blade forward. Behind her was a scoreboard showing 16 points and her opponent's 2. All the cadets used their main weapons. It was easier to assess and not as painful. However, the girl with thick triangular eyebrows shouted 934th place Hajin. She was hanging over the guy, having already won 18 clean victories and shouting for him to get up immediately. Trembling, the guy thought gloomily, why was he the only one fighting the instructor? The red-haired instructor said that he probably had a question. She would explain it to him. The training pistol was still in the manufacturing stage, and training with a real pistol was too dangerous. She walked towards the guy lying on his stomach, saying that that's why he was put with the instructor, that is, with her. In horror, he exclaimed that he could not do it anymore and surrendered. Clenching her fist, the instructor shouted that it would not be possible to surrender in a real fight and ordered to strengthen the defense. Hajin watched in shock as she swung her fist. A blue mark from the skill appeared in the guy's eye. He quickly jumped back, avoiding the attack. The girl looked at him in surprise, not expecting it. The hero clenched his teeth in concentration. He barely dodged a quick blow to the body, and then, opening his mouth, he avoided a blow to the jaw. The redhead froze in surprise, thinking that this guy, the position is a little awkward, but he is watching her blows. Hajin's eyes glowed blue. He used the skill Farsight. He saw arrows coming from the figure of the girl standing in a fighting stance. Farsight allows you to see at a great distance and roughly predict the trajectory of the enemy's movement. Curving in horror, he still managed to dodge a new attack and thought that the skill, of course, only helps and he should dodge himself. A classmate pointed a finger, telling his comrade to look at him. Just jumping around. Covering himself with his hands, the hero turned to them with displeasure. However, the system reported that the SP points were increased by 40. The guy thought that attracting attention did have a useful effect after all. The can of cola fell down. Sighing tiredly, Hajin sat down by the machine, taking it out, and gloomily turned to the side. Yona was walking past him along the corridor. She looked gloomily at the guy. He silently looked at her. The girl went on, and the hero thought that even though he wrote it, she had a character. Touching the button on the machine with his finger, he thought maybe he should conduct a small experiment. Yona turned around when she heard her name being called. A can of cola was thrown at her. The girl caught it with a movement of her hand. Holding the can, she asked, was he lifting it up? Getting up, the guy asked, what was she talking about? The girl turned. Hearing that she helped him a lot during the last training, he wanted to be friends with her. It's just an experiment. The boy's eyes glowed slightly blue. He thought that if he got 40 points when he attracted attention in front of the secondary characters, how many points would he get after talking to the main character? Yona closed her eyes and said no, let him drink it himself, and Hajin also caught the cola that was thrown back. The girl pointed her finger in displeasure and said that he shouldn't address her informally without permission. This was the first warning. She turned around, tossing her hair. Yona was walking down the street. Suddenly, she looked ahead, realizing she was holding a bag in her hand, and the girl realized that its weight had changed. The girl picked up the bag, opening it, and took out a can of cola. Hajin smiled in his mind, showing a thumbs up, and he discreetly put the can down. The girl cursed that he was crazy and angrily swung the can. However, she did not throw it. Putting the can back in her bag, Yona thought that the cola wasn't to blame. Hajin stood at the railing of the stairs and thought that Yona liked simple food, cola, ramen, hamburgers, but because of her reputation, she couldn't buy it. Holding the laptop, the guy turned around and thought that if he tried to touch the unknown settings, then even with the help of short dialogues, he would not earn many points. Still, he would have to interfere with the main plot. His fingers squeezed the laptop case. Further in the story, the same thing should happen. The attack of human monsters on the State Arms Museum. The hero imagined a wide staircase at the entrance to the museum. Human monsters. The hand reached for a clawed paw. These are people who made a pact with the devil. People stood in the crowd. The girl smiled. In exchange for their souls, they gained enormous power, became subordinates of the devil, and spread in this world. The purpose of this incident was to kill a certain person, for which they hid in the museum. The hero imagined how the blue-haired one attacks, leaving a bright trace, and thought that, however, they were destroyed by the main characters who came on an excursion at that time. Thanks to this episode, the main character Suho will be able to attract the attention of other characters. He imagined a cute picture of the characters and thought that the heroes of the book Suho and Neun will appear here. And the human monsters are not that dangerous yet, since this is only the beginning of the work. Thoughtfully looking ahead, Hajin decided that great, he will be able to wedge himself into this episode. He thought that first he should find a way to get on an excursion to the museum. Suddenly, a man in a cap called out to him, saying that class time was over. Why was he standing here and not going to the dorm? Hajin put down his laptop, hearing the demand to give his number, and apologized, saying that he was already leaving. Bright symbols appeared on the black monitor. Among them, the envelope symbol was glowing. The word club appeared on a light background. The guy pressed the join button on the screen. There are communities in the cube, which are called clubs. They are small groups of cadets who unite for a common hobby and are engaged in various activities. Someone was fighting in the ring, science, martial arts. Another person was watering the garden, practical classes, hobbies, and so on. Another one was busy with music. The rest were into art. There were about 100 different societies in the cube. The two shook hands. These clubs were not only aimed at self-improvement, but also for the cadets to communicate with each other. The bright sun illuminated the white walls. Today, I am going to visit this club. Someone greeted me warmly. The red-haired guy smiled widely. Han Hyun, the chairman of the Healing Rain Travel Club. He thanked them for joining their club. The class monitor smiled, looking at Suho. On the other side, a girl yawned. There are many amazing people among the newcomers to the club this year. Han-hyun awkwardly lowered his head after hearing the support and thought about how he didn't know whether it was real or not when he received the application to join. Walking up to the others, he said that he would tell them about their club again. He presented a map with directions, saying that the club's purpose was to relax. 1-2 times a month, they will arrange trips outside the cube through the portal. Hajin stood and listened that today they will conduct an introduction to the club and at the same time take a mini trip not far from here. Han-hyun smiled happily, saying that they will go to Seoul, but Hajin only frowned. Looking at the others, he thought that they will split into pairs and go on a free trip. This coincides with the content of his book. The hero imagined a pedestal with a sign of the National Weapons Museum, thinking that today his goal is the Seoul Weapons Museum, where the first main story will begin. Han-hyun ordered to draw lots to divide into teams. Hajin looked at the box in surprise, not understanding if this is how teams are distributed. But he did not care who he got, everyone will act separately. The name of the main character was called, and the girl turned around, looking at him. Hajin looked confused. The girl folded her arms across her chest, suggesting that they go separately. She turned around when the hero supported her. The guy looked at Yonha in surprise, who wanted to add something else. She looked at him intently, reminding him not to address her familiarly. The hero lowered his eyebrows, hearing that this was the second warning. The sun's rays illuminated the street. People were walking along the corridor. There was a National Weapons Museum with the largest weapons exhibition hall in Korea. Hajin was walking among the display cases. Turning around, he noticed Naeun. Suho was standing at another display case. The blue-haired man was looking at something. Remembering the cover, the hero recognized the main character in him. Hajin approached him. There were bladed weapons on display behind the glass. He asked the blue-haired man if he was looking at the 7 knives and introduced himself. Suho apologized, putting his hand on his neck, saying that he forgot for a second. Looking at the interlocutor, he asked if he was the shooter who chose the gun and if he joined the club. Hajin thought that Suho was strong, cute, fair, but because of him, the readers had many complaints that he did not look like a normal person. Suho offered to look at the hall with firearms, but the hero refused. Shards fell from the ceiling when Hajin said that there was not enough time. People looked up. The loudspeaker announced that monsters had appeared near the museum. Panic began. Everyone rushed to the exit. Someone pushed the child. Someone's fist hit the glass. Everyone turned towards the sound. Suho was holding the girl in his arms. Naeun urged everyone to calm down, saying that the hero would come soon. She took the bow. The system notified about the theft of an exhibit. The girl warned that if they ran outside, they would be eaten by monsters. A new message announced the activation of the barrier. The hall turned red. Naeun put the quiver on her back, telling the guy that they would have to protect the people until the hero came. Footsteps were heard. The girl reached for an arrow, noticing someone. The guy was walking calmly, surrounded by a dark aura. Naeun shouted that someone had already gotten inside. Hajin realized that it was the human monster Lucius Dog, the villain who contributed to the development of the protagonist. Claws appeared on his hands. Suho pounced on the enemy. The hero watched, remembering the plot of the book. Suho would have easily dealt with it, but the enemy threw him back. The blue-haired man smashed the wall with his body. Hajin looked at the lying Suho, realizing that in the plot, everything was different. At first, Kim Suho was losing, then he gathered his strength and won. Naeun called out to Suho. He woke up, trying to get up. The enemy was moving forward. The girl fired arrows, but they broke. She realized that he was only using agility. He smiled ominously. Hajin watched in surprise. When the monster rushed at the girl, she screamed for Hajin to go away. Its claws almost touched Naeun's face, but Suho suddenly struck. Opening his mouth wide, he asked if she was okay. Reaching for another arrow, the girl only asked about him. The monster had already pounced on the blue-haired guy. The guy held back the attack with his sword. Dark marks wrapped around the blade. Something bright appeared among them. The demonic beast held the blade in its mouth. Suho thought that its body had changed. The demon pressed harder on the blade. The guy fell to the floor, feeling fangs at his neck. The enemy suddenly flinched in pain as arrows pierced him. Naeun, holding the bow, was surprised. The monster looked at her and pointed a dark hand in her direction. The girl looked at her in confusion. Grabbing her, he slammed her against the wall. Hajin realized they were in trouble. Taking off his backpack, he thought that at this rate someone might die and shouted for everyone to back off. The demon held Naeun against the wall. Suho tried to hold back the onslaught. The hero wondered why the plot of his book had changed so much. Putting his laptop on the floor, Hajin picked up the clip. There were magic bullets with destructive power lying on the floor. He realized that they couldn't deal a fatal blow. Editing the settings, he increased the destructive power to 6 points. Loading the gun, Hajin ran towards the enemy, thinking about the properties of light and darkness. Firing a light bullet, he asked Suho to back off. The bullet hit the demon, tearing off his arm. Naeun fell to the floor. Suho, surrounded by an aura, swung his sword with symbols, cutting the monster. It collapsed. Suho, leaning on his knee, tried to catch his breath. Naeun waved off his help. Hajin advised her to leave her, saying that her brother would be coming soon. Suho and Naeun looked at him in surprise. The girl trembled, asking what he said again. Later, Seung-ah, having dealt with the monsters, asked about the situation at the museum. Hearing the names of Suho and Hajin, she rushed inside. Seeing Hajin, she greeted him, asking if he was a cadet. He indicated that Suho was inside. Later, Hajin, sitting on a bench, analyzed the changes in the plot, realizing that the world had become a remake of his book. A message appeared on the screen about the increase in the level of villains. Suho asked why Hajin mentioned Naeun's brother. He answered, pretending not to know. Hanhyun wanted to say that he really did not know, but Suho only gritted his teeth. The setting sun illuminated the sky, and he said that they would talk about it another time. Later, Naeun's profile was opened on the screen. Currently a student at the Hero Academy. Family relations: father Chi Senjek, brother Chi Jin-yoon. Hajin, who was sitting at the laptop, said that everything was as he described in the book. But something caught his attention. It said that his brother was now in serious condition. In the photo, rescuers were carrying him away. Below was information that he was in a coma. Hajin imagined several people going to him operation to suppress human monsters' arson. This was the first opportunity for the ally of the main character Chi Jin-yoon to gain fame. Then Jin-yoon smiled widely. At that time, she was 13 years old. She looked at the guy with delight and she was very proud of her brother who became a hero. He said that this was his version of the book. Now the hero looked at the screen in confusion. Another message appeared there. Opening it, he saw a note that the changes would be sent in a message after the subject Kim Ha-jin personally confirmed them. The new message said that Jin-yoon in the story is Naeun's brother and Kim Suho's assistant. Later, Jin-yoon was lying on the ground in blood. Later, it was decided that the main character had too many assistants, so changes were made. Tears streamed down the blonde's face. 4 years ago, when Chi Jin-yoon became a hero during the first mission, he received a devil's mark and became a demon seed. Hajin's eyes widened. He didn't understand what was written there. The board was dark. Glows reported that today at 13 in the middle of Seoul, a whole flock of monsters appeared. As a result of the unexpected appearance of the monsters, 50 people were injured, 7 people died. The hand touched the radio when it managed to report that the deputy head of the Strait of Essence Guild, Yun Seung-ae, took part in suppressing the situation. The girl was sitting on the bed. She laid her head on her knees. The man entered the room, saying her name. Naeun turned around, calling him dad, and asked him about work. Coming closer, he only asked again, "Is this a problem? How are you feeling?" And the girl replied that she was fine. Looking at her, the father clarified, "Don't you need to get examined?" But Naeun refused and asked, "Why did you come?" She lowered her head, hearing that he was worried, and said that she was really fine. He looked closely at his daughter when she addressed him. Hugging her knees again, the girl asked if she could meet you again before being discharged. Her father only looked at her sympathetically. Taking her hand, he agreed. Meanwhile, Hajin put his head on his hand, imagining a monster and reading about how demons were creatures higher than humans. Monsters? They left marks on people and turned them into demon seeds. After that, the incubation period passed, the seeds sprouted and people turned into strong demons. This period lasted 5 minutes 6 years. Naeun stood in front of the door to the ward. Half of it had already passed. Her brother's name was on the plate. The hero continued to sit at the laptop. The girl went inside. In this confusing situation, there was only one answer. Both lowered their heads. Until the demon awakened in Chi Jin-yoon's body, it was necessary to kill him as quickly as possible. The sister stood in front of her brother lying in bed. The light from the monitor illuminated the face of the protagonist, who was thinking about how to do this. Who should do this? Imagining their father, the hero thought that it was impossible to hire a person. No mercenary would undertake the murder of an oligarch's son. Naeun sat next to Seung-ah's bed. He showed no signs of seed germination, so it was impossible to do anything either. Afterwards, he imagined the battlefield, arguing that there was no way to stop the demon that was about to manifest in Kim Soo-ho. Even when the active heroes enter the fight, casualties among them are inevitable. Therefore, now is not the time to do anything, because these heroes play a big role in the second part of the book. The sister looked at her brother in a coma. Our hero began to tremble. Smiling, the girl said that it was her. And Hajin, sitting at the table, said that he should kill her brother. Naeun crossed her legs and said that she saw such a human monster for the first time. She almost died. No, but how could an ordinary cadet inflict a fatal blow on him? Then she frowned, talking about the shooter, but she suddenly fell silent. She only said that it was not worth talking about it. Turning around, she heard the word that visiting time was over. Putting her hand on her brother, the girl said that she would look in on him again, and headed for the exit. She lowered her head, and took a step forward. Then she stopped. She again remembered Hajin and his words. She remembered his look and words that her brother would come soon and calm her down. Then Naeun pursed her lip. Frowning, she looked forward, repeating his name. Several tall buildings rose to the sky. The Tower of Heroes. At the entrance, it was written that this was an archive and someone addressed the deputy leader. Seung-ah was throwing out documents when a person behind her said that viewing materials from a state organization was illegal. What to do if someone noticed her? But sitting down at the table, she answered nothing. She was going to take a second to look at the records of today's incident at the museum, and the guy thought that this was the whole problem. Remembering the killed monster, the girl said that traces with the property of light were found in the body of the human monster. It turns out that one of those who fought with him used this property. She seemed to flare up, saying that such a person could become a rather dangerous opponent. Alia, a human monster. It is necessary to find him at all costs and drag him to them. But the guy only thought that she was worried again because of her premonition of a talented shot. Opening the camera records, Seung-ah said that they say that 3 cadets who were on an excursion at the time fought with this human monster, and Han-hyun said that one of them used the properties of light. Remembering Suho and Naeun, he said that they were already under his supervision. Lost in thought, the girl put her hand to her face and said that she heard about the latter for the first time and found her in the Cuba rankings, 934th place. Later, Hajin was sitting with a laptop and said that he had recently realized one fact. Seeing the blue windows on the screen, he noted that it seemed that other people did not see this laptop. He added that, at least, he could not worry about the main characters and calmly check the contents of the book. He also added a feature to the laptop when he found out that it was invisible to others. Looking at the blonde, he said that Rachel had won. Then a notification about a change in the settings appeared. Watching his comrades, the hero saw that Demayan's self-confidence was lower than usual and noted that this was such a function. He assumed that being among many people and continuing to talk about if settings that differ from the plot of the book appear within a radius of 30 meters from him, he should immediately receive notifications. Someone stamped their foot behind their back when he thought that this was much more effective than messages from the co-author after his confirmation. Bayoon clenched her fists and offered to fight again. Turning around, he silently looked and the others noticed them when the hero said that he did not want to, but the girl asked why and added that he was talking about other people's families. But looking at the interlocutor, the hero said that these were real bullets and he had to be careful and added that he did not want to be scolded for wounding a classmate. Naeun got angry and clenched her teeth and called him a freak. Then the instructor came in and asked what they were doing, and turning around, the girl heard that Cadet Kim Ha-jin could not fight with other cadets due to the lack of training weapons and that Cadet Naeun should return to his place. In anger, she began to leave and, watching her, the hero thought that he should not apologize to her now. Looking at his hand with scratches, he realized that his primary goals were to try his best to become stronger. After that, he assumed that Jin-eun should be killed and, watching her leave, he realized that even if their relationship improved, then she would only be betrayed by him. The bright sun illuminated the walls of the building and many people gathered inside. Blue light fell from the ceiling and someone's voice asked if everyone was there. The guy had a microphone in his hand and Hyun, the representative of the Truth Science Club, greeted everyone at the introductory lesson of the Truth class. Standing on the stage, he announced that the purpose of their club is to analyze monsters and research strategies, adding that they meet every week to discuss. The girls looked at him with admiration when he told them to read the brochures that were handed out to them. Looking closely at him, someone noted his attractive appearance and ability to keep the audience's attention on himself. Folding his arms over his chest, Hajin noted that all of these were demonic abilities, adding that a long shadow fell from the speaker. From the very beginning of the story in Cuba, where the main plot unfolds, various incidents began to occur with cadets disappearing, monsters attacking, and so on, and Hyun would become the villain who would be responsible for all of these incidents. Imagining Hyun kneeling in front of the silhouette of a girl, the hero assumed that after making a contract with the demon Lilith, he gained the skill of charm and became a human monster. Continuing to look at the speaker, Hajin noted that this was the one he was hunting now, adding that she was the reason he joined this club. He looked at Yona, who sat with her arms folded across her chest, and pressing a button, the speaker announced that today was an introductory meeting, so he would just talk a little about the club's activities. An image of a beast appeared behind him and he said that it was an above-average level monster, a mountain tyrant that appeared during the outcall, and it turned out that it was almost 60 years old. Several dots appeared on the beast's body and, regardless of where the monsters are, outside the cube or inside, information about high Rega monsters is of great value, which can be worth at least several billion won. The girl looked at Hyun when he asked her what the vital information about this mountain tyrant was, and the guy pressed the button on the remote again when she answered that it was unknown and said that the purpose of their club was to discuss such cases. A bright beam came from the spotlight and the speaker informed everyone that those who wanted to share their thoughts were asked to stay for the meeting after the end of the class. The hero stood up from his seat and asked the girl if she would go, but Yona silently walked past. An angry Hajin asked her respectfully, and looking at her in surprise, she replied that yes, she might be able to get useful information, and he thought that this was a place where information about monsters might be useful. The girl glared at the hero when he asked if he wanted to tell the dungeon clearing team in his guild, and on the bright background were the silhouettes of people from the Essence Straight Guild. After introducing the monster, the hero guessed that it was created 50 years ago during an outcall and added that the key figures in it were the Yonha family. After he guessed that now it is one of the big guilds that have a lot of influence in Korea, and Yonha frowned when Hajin said that recently the influence of the deputy guild leader has been declining, so she, as the successor, also feels threatened. Raising an eyebrow, she heard a question about this, that he wanted to go to the meeting and get information, and asked again what he was doing this for. And the hero said that he wanted to get information, since this information could be useful, and added that it was created 50 years ago during an outcall. Putting his hands in his pockets, the hero said that he would tell about the weak points of the mountain tyrant. Her question was heard throughout the hall, and the guy answered that if you want to run the guild without problems later, then you should already be making an effort now, right? Imagining the beast's leg, the hero said that there is a small blue pattern on its heel, and if you hit it right there, it will not be able to move. Now calmly looking at the interlocutor, she heard words about the fact that naturally this information is not free and your guild has an arsenal, right? Imagining a gun, the hero said that he would like you to get the Desert Eagle for him there. The girl just looked at him thoughtfully, and still looking at him, she asked what is the basis for such a statement, do you have evidence? Then Hajin smiled and a strange feeling appeared between them when he answered that he did not. Yonha looked closely at the interlocutor and, turning away, she got angry saying that she just wasted her time, but the guy said that it would be beneficial for you to believe him. Looking at her, he thought that if she ignored his words, then information worth several billion won would turn into an ordinary piece of paper. The bright sun illuminated the leaves of the trees, but if she believed him, then he would have an army of allies. Someone's voice asked the secretary if she could pass on something to the team that was dealing with the mountain tyrant. Yonha opened her mouth wide and said that it was about the next raid. The girl held the bracelet to her mouth saying that the vital place of the monster is the blue pattern on the heel, let them check. Hajin understood that this army would later be called the Kings of Seoul. On the piece of paper it was written that it was a bill for a loan, and below was the amount to be paid 300 million won. Hajin was shocked. Imagining a satisfied Ch Hadun, Hajin thought that the maximum amount that a cadet is given on credit is exactly 300 million. What was this Kim Ch Hundan doing more interestingly? The hero lowered his eyebrows in displeasure and then looked at the screen, seeing only 3 million on the bank book, so I am the fact that I will not be able to return to my world. After the guy imagined how he sells organs or fishes, realizing that he risks dying here, paying off debts for the rest of his life. Scratching his head, Hajin thought that he should earn money, and now there are 2 ways to legally earn a lot of money. Imagining different graphs, he thought about stocks, and then he imagined a high tower, thinking that in this world dungeons and towers appear like mushrooms after the rain. It is necessary to find guilds that are engaged in clearing dungeons and buy shares of developing guilds. Looking ahead, he thought that he knew which of them would succeed, but he had no money to buy shares, so this method was not suitable. Then he had to act himself, go out onto the field. The second method was to hunt on the field, and the hero imagined a map with marks. This was a dangerous zone where monsters appeared. And then he imagined selling things, arguing that the difficulty level here was very different from towers and dungeons, but selling monster corpses could make good money. Looking at his indicators, he thought that his points had only just now exceeded those of the average adult man, and whether he would be able to go out onto the field. He thought about it, putting his hand to his face, and even if he enhanced the effect of the gun with an additional device, it would be a waste of energy. Was there no other way? Suddenly he heard a sound behind him, and someone was knocking on the door, saying that he had a parcel from Yonha. He looked questioningly, and, opening the door, the hero saw a suitcase. The guy leaned over, opened it, and his mouth dropped open at what he saw. The bright sun illuminated the city, Gangwon Province, Wonju City, the field area. Smiling broadly, the man thanked the cadet for using the portal services, and, walking to the entrance, the hero noted that it was worth saying that he was a cadet, and she became so polite. There were many people at the entrance, and the hero stepped onto the step. In front of him, a view of the street opened up, and everyone was doing their own thing. The Gangwon area is considered to be quite low in terms of field danger. There are many foreigners all year round who come to hunt, so the city is called an international metropolis. Someone shouted that he was looking for a team, and the guy put his hand to his face, saying that a recruitment of magicians ready to go together to the Chayak Mountains was underway. Looking around, he heard that they were talking in these areas about some crazy person who hunts monsters with his bare hands. Walking further, he noticed a girl who said that everything together would cost 600,000 won, and he noticed how someone was bargaining for trolls and thought that it would be much more profitable for them to sell monsters to an agent. He heard footsteps behind him when he wondered if someone could find an agent in these parts. He turned around when someone caught his attention. The man in glasses asked the hero if he had come to hunt. Turning around, Hajin asked if he was an agent, to which he answered in the affirmative, saying that he was looking for his business card. After that, he handed the business card to the hero, but he only thought that the man was strange, but his attention was drawn to the fact that it said SN Suhyuk Agency. He remembered the man on the cover of the magazine and thought that he would become the director of the best agency in Korea, and Kim Soo-ho's personal agent Suhyuk awkwardly scratched the back of his head, and the hero thought that he did not expect to meet him here. The interlocutor was surprised when the hero asked again the name of the agency. He extended his hand and said that the inscription convinced him and that he would make a contract. After Hajin thought that this world was just the beginning of a book and that many characters did not yet know their true worth. Suhyuk shook the hero's hand and said that he would provide him with the best service. The hero thought that it would be a good idea to establish contacts with them in advance, but he frowned, wondering if he could intercept Kim Soo-ho's agency. The sun's rays illuminated the foliage, and turning around, Hajin asked if they could really go with him. Suhyuk, breathing heavily, asked not to worry and said that if it became dangerous, they could drop their weapons and run. But the hero thought that agents usually wait outside the field. The man noticed traces on the ground and said that there were traces of hobgoblins. He noted that the difficulty level was low and that one could get about 300 to 400,000 won. He asked how they liked it. Turning around again, the hero expressed doubts, thinking that for one destroyed tower they give about 200,000 won. He suggested that if you think about the price, the monster is more profitable. Then he pointed his finger in the other direction. Standing at the edge, they saw a boar below. Adjusting his glasses, Suhyuk said that it was a steel boar. With a slight smile, he noted that such a boar could not be defeated with a pistol. He added that the bullets would not penetrate his skin, but the hero said that they would not know until they tried. The man looked at the hero in surprise, and he said that he had a very good gun. Remembering the conversation with Yonha, the hero said that he received this weapon in exchange for information about the mountain tyrant. Hajin pointed the gun at the target and a description appeared that it was a desert eagle. The agent looked at the weapon in amazement, and the hero thought that he had used SP and added some settings. When the hero aimed, the man expressed concern that the beast would only get angry. Frowning, the hero aimed the weapon. A shot rang out. The bullet pierced the boar. The beast opened its mouth in shock. Suhyuk did the same as the beast, and he and the boar fell to the ground. The weapon description appeared again with a note that in the case of an enemy, the destructive power amplification indicators double. Hajin took a step closer to the cliff. Satisfied, he looked down and said that the weapon's performance was not bad. Smoke came from the weapon. Kneeling, the agent noted that it was an amazing weapon and that it shot perfectly. However, the hero looked away and thanked the agent. Then he fired another shot. The bird fell down when Suhyuk asked what was there, and the hero replied that there was a black pelican near the rocks. Adjusting his glasses, the man asked if he could really see that far, to which the hero replied in the affirmative. Circles appeared before Hajin's eyes and he said that he could see 1,000 ahead. Then he turned around and said that he was going. The sunset rays illuminated the sky and the agent asked to wait for him. And the bird fell right on the boar. Examining them, the man said that it was just part of the monster and their weight was great, and the hero asked if they could drag them beyond the field. The agent put his hand to his face and said that it would be better to pay the 119 service. He would transfer the money tomorrow. The hero thought that everything was clear with him because it was Suhyuk. Shaking hands, the hero agreed and said that he hoped for a profitable cooperation. The man asked with a smile whether this was the hero's first hunt in the field and asked how he would use his fee. Calmly looking at his interlocutor, the hero replied that he would buy shares. The man only smiled silently. Hajin presented a silhouette and said that the new Packhorse Master Guild was created by human monsters and that it plays an important role in the book. He sat at his laptop and thought that, of course, he should now focus on other settings, but there is a dungeon that this guild cleared. In the book, it is described as a devil's nest. Presenting the graphs, the hero noted that after the clearing, the Packhorse Master Guild shares will grow by 1,000%. Having pressed the buy button, Hajin reasoned that he only needs to buy and he will certainly be a winner. A message appeared about the completed purchase. He looked at the bracelet screen and wondered if there was any more information on the shares. If there were no official communities, then he would have to go to the shadow site Purple Bagot. Then he looked up in surprise. He started talking about colors and remembered something, and he again imagined different people. The group of chameleons. Until the second half of the book they were the main villains. This is a criminal organization about whose members there was no information, only that they disguised the color. Perhaps their data and information about their activities were known only to him, the author of this book. The guy looked thoughtful and reasoned that although they were criminals, they avoided human monsters. He thought that if only he could get into the guild arena, then maybe he could tell something about the incident with Jinyun. Sitting down at the laptop again, Hajin remembered that around this time, according to the plot, one place became free in their guild, which meant they should soon begin searching. But the monitor turned off. The hero looked at the black screen in a panic. His eyes grew bigger with excitement, as this was possibly the only way to return to his world. but the image started to appear again. Hajin had already smiled. However, a message appeared saying that 1 month had passed. The laptop's functions are being updated 0.01%. The bright rays of the sun illuminated the room. The girl whispered to her boyfriend to look in someone's direction. Yona and Jonghak were sitting opposite. The guy raised his head and asked if it was possible to stop these high society gatherings. The girl replied with a smile that even if she got tired of it, they would not lose anything if they established close ties with social leaders in advance. Leaning on the table, the girl asked how your grades have been lately and, upon hearing the answer, noted that the Jonghak she knows will not calm down until he achieves first place. But looking at the bracelet screen, Jonghak said that therefore he thinks everything is fine. Feeling awkward, Yona agreed. The door to the cafe opened. Naeun walked inside. The guy jumped up from his chair and greeted her. Yona was confused when he approached her and asked her why she was attending meetings now. She said that if she had known that he would be here too, she would have come. Approaching Naeun, the hero asked how she had been to the hospital, to which the girl replied that it was nothing serious. Yona only lowered her head. Someone put a glass of drink on the table, saying that she was going to tell something. Yona opened her eyes wide when she heard the question if they knew Hajin. The girl looked at her interlocutor in surprise and asked what was wrong with him. Naeun looked away, saying that it was about that incident at the museum. That day, there were 3 of them, she, Suho, and this guy. Remembering the fight, she said that the human monster was stronger than she thought. The battle was brutal and happened right during the fight. Then she remembered how a bright light tore off her arm and called Hajin an idiot. At that moment, the monster man's arm was torn off. Then she watched in shock. She thought that this was even possible with the help of some training gun if he simply tore off the man-monster's arm. She remembered Hajin's look and found what happened very suspicious. Seeing how her interlocutor thought, Naeun remembered that they were on the same team and asked what he thought about him. She was confused, not knowing what to answer. She said that he lived in a shelter, became a cadet of Cuba and owed about 300 million. She added that these are all Hajin's features. She noted that it was unclear how and where he found out about the mountain tyrant. The girl stood by the white wall. She remembered how the hero said that he did not answer questions. She decided that she would have to continue the investigation and considered it necessary to check whether he would be useful to her or not. At that moment, pushing the cup off the table, she said that he was just an ordinary person and thought that in a fight with a human monster, she noticed that he had enough strength to break his arm. Taking a sip, she wondered if this meant that he had something hidden. Naeun leaned closer and asked if he was a human monster. Her comrades looked at her in surprise. Her friend asked if he had started attacking his own. She agreed, but noted that there was something in him, that is. Meanwhile, Hajin was looking at the bright monitor of the laptop. The update was almost finished. Then a light appeared near his hand. He turned around, covering his eye. There was blood on his wrist. Drops of blood fell on the chair. The hero grabbed his hand. A message appeared that this stigmata contains magic, one of the types of power of the creator. The hero put his hand to his head and thought that information appeared in it like a tsunami. The hand hit the table. Jonghak leaned on the table and asked if he liked this guy. Naeun looked away. The hero fell to his knees. He reached for the laptop with his hand. Lowering her head, Naeun again remembered the words about her brother and, raising her head, said that it was something like that. Having fallen to the floor, the hero lost consciousness, but the laptop continued to work. A list of updates appeared on its screen. Seoul, the Association Tower, sometime after the incident at the museum. After the fight with the human monster, the protagonist, Suho and Naeun received awards for their contribution to the safety of society. The guy squeezed his hand. He looked tensely at his wrist and thought that yesterday's wound was still aching. The hero raised his hand and decided that he should find out what kind of skill this was. Naeun, sitting next to him, crossed her arms and asked him to be quieter with displeasure. The brunette turned to her and replied that he had not said anything. His classmate grimaced and said that he was making noise here anyway. The young man asked if she had forgotten. The archer frowned and asked what he was talking about. When Hajin reminded her that he had saved her, the girl's face distorted with disdain. She flared up and exclaimed, "What does this have to do with it?" Suho stood up from his seat and asked them to stop. He offered Naeun to change places with him, but she refused. The hero looked at her absent-mindedly, not understanding what the girl had done here. Suho sat down next to the young man. The guy coughed in embarrassment and thanked the archer for that time. Hajin turned pale and sighed, thinking that it had started again. The swordsman smiled and said that they would not have been able to win if the main character had not helped. The brunette looked away and replied that they would have managed without him. If he had not been there then, perhaps a higher level of power would have awakened in them. After all, the main character always becomes stronger in the face of danger. Suho looked at the young man in surprise. The cameraman in the headphones turned to his colleague and nervously shouted that he was here and everyone should get ready. A man with long hair came out of the portal. He scratched the back of his head and frowned. Yu Shihyuk, a high-ranking hero ranked 37th, frowned and muttered in displeasure that he was being forced to walk back and forth. The man extended his hands to the man standing on the stage with the documents. Everyone whispered that this man was the Wolf of Valhalla, who possessed enormous magical power. The announcement of the beginning of the award ceremony was made. Hajin, Suho and Naeun became serious when all the winners were asked to come up on stage. A voice announced that the hero Shihyuk would be hosting the ceremony. The man stood in front of 3 cadets. The host said that these people were able to destroy the human monster in a dangerous situation and became model citizens of society. The hero handed the letter to the swordsman and asked if he was Suho. The boy confirmed with a smile. Shihyuk said that it was not surprising that everyone wanted to get him. The cadet looked at his interlocutor and muttered that he was exaggerating. The man squeezed the letter of commendation for a second. He leaned over and, grinning, advised the young man not to come to the association, but to work as a hunter for the Endless Field Guild. Shihyuk added that heroes have too much responsibility and there is nothing interesting in the work. The boy smiled and replied that this occupation, nevertheless, suits him. The man moved away and scratched his ear, muttering that the student is boring. He looked at the blushing girl and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Naeun was embarrassed and muttered something to the teacher, but he interrupted her, asking since when he was her teacher. The man said that her father asked him to take care of her, but that was not in his plans. The girl's face sank, and the protagonist smirked. Shihyuk turned to him, and the boy shuddered. He asked who he was. The protagonist said his name, and the protagonist indifferently handed him the diploma. They say that the only thing worse than hatred is indifference. That was exactly the situation now. The host announced that they would end the award ceremony here, and asked Naeun to say a few words. Later, at the cafe, Hajin smiled contentedly and carried a tray with both a drink and dessert. The reward for destroying the human monster was impressive. The young man sat down at the table and muttered that he decided to buy more shares of the Packhorse Master Guild with this money. He opened his laptop, deciding to check the updated functions. Information about the updated functions, stigmata, internet activation, a low-level skill, Book of Truth, was added to the observation and viewing skill. The protagonist remembered the mark that appeared and thought that the wound on his wrist was now called a stigmata. He looked at his hand and noted that the usage method was rather imprecise. It was said that the guy could use it according to his wishes. Hajin thought about his wish, and at that moment the mark lit up. The cadet hurried to hide his hand under the table. He was sweating and decided to check later in the dorm. The guy pressed the internet activation function. The brunette's eyes widened in surprise. In front of him was a list of available sites: Law-Abiding Spirit, Purple Banquet, Jeremy Sword, Messenger, Covenant, and Weaponry. The hero thoughtfully touched his chin and noted that in addition to regular websites, there were also those that could be accessed for a fee. An important site is Purple Banquet. This is the most famous site among the underground ones. Here you can trade information, weapons, awards, place orders, and so on. There are almost no heroes who have never used this site. Therefore, even the government turns a blind eye, although it knows about this shadow industry. To register for the Purple Banquet, you need to pay a decent amount. The screen said that 200 SP is required to register. The young man thought that if he had 200 points, he could easily make an account. The guy looked at his laptop and decided to give it a try, but at that moment someone touched the chair opposite him. Seung-ah looked at him with a smile and asked if the cadet knew her. The hero looked at the woman in surprise. She put her hand in her coat pocket and said that she was very surprised when Hajin suddenly disappeared from the awards ceremony. The guild deputy put a business card on the table. The brunette looked at it and thought that if Seung-ah was giving her business card, it meant a lot. The woman leaned on her hand and said that she was curious about something. She smiled and asked if she could ask a question. Most likely, this is the first stage of Seung-ah's recruitment method. The guy looked at her intently. In the media, the woman looks quite friendly, but inside she is completely different. If the person she brought does not meet her expectations, the deputy simply gets rid of them. Takes what she wants, throws out who she wants. The principle of natural selection. This is Seung-ah, the deputy leader of the best guild in Korea. Connections with her will be useful for further developments. She smiled and began to say that she was curious, but the hero abruptly refused. The woman looked questioningly at the interlocutor, but he said that he had nothing to tell her. Seung-ah smiled tensely and said that the young man did not seem to understand, because she was now showing great interest in him as the deputy leader of the #1 guild in the country. The brunette put the laptop in his backpack and thanked him for his interest, if it was sincere. The woman looked at him in shock. The hero thought that the deputy most likely saw that the cadet used an attack with the property of light. Now Seung-ah is experiencing ordinary curiosity. The guy stood up and decided that he needed to leave here so that her curiosity could grow into something more. The young man said that it was time for him to go. The interlocutor opened her mouth in surprise and asked again, Description: Stigmata. Stigmata contain magic, one of the types of power of the creator. Every time the amount of SP exceeds a certain value, and the level of attention rises by one level, one stigmata appears. The magic contained in the stigmata can be used according to Hajin's wishes. When using all magical powers, they are restored within 24 hours. The mark on his hand began to shine, and the young man decided to transform the magic of the stigmata into the form of a sword. A blade appeared above his hand. The brunette waved the weapon and muttered that one has only to think about what he wants to use, as it appears by itself. Magic is an ability that is greatly influenced by abilities and training. The hero looked at his hand and said that he did not even imagine that he would be able to use magic when he came to this world. It was good that such a method had appeared. Then he decided to test the Book of Truth skill. Hajin thoughtfully rubbed his chin. The mark on his hand began to glow again. A shining book appeared in the air. The hero looked at the object in shock. This book contains the truth. It can answer any question if magic allows it. The young man's eyes widened in surprise. The cadet looked at the book and asked how tall he was. The artifact answered that he was 174 centimeters. Notification: you spent 1 SP? That's how the guy found out how they were spent. The bracelet on his hand lit up and started beeping. The hero looked at his hand and read that an emergency notification had arrived. General message: we are looking for the last person to see Cadet Jinha Jiang from the world class. Hajin looked tensely at the notification and muttered that it seemed like the second main story had begun. The incident with the disappearance of people in Cuba. As you can tell from the title, 6 cadets will disappear during the month that this episode lasted. The criminals' tracks will not be found, the investigation will reach a dead end. The number of missing people will only increase, as if someone was deliberately mocking them. This episode is of great importance because the criminal's target is Yonha. If the protagonist's assistant dies due to the co-author's interference, it will be a big problem. Hajin touched his chin and thought that it would be better to find the culprit himself. He lowered his hand and remembered that history could be distorted if he made a hasty decision. In the end, the young man decided to watch from the side for now. The next day, the sun's rays penetrated the training hall. Suho took a few sips of water. A classmate approached him and pointed to the side, offering to look at him. Someone kicked the disc on the barbell. 2 people approached the protagonist and asked what this loser was doing. They looked at the young man crouched near the barbell. The red-haired guy was bullying, saying that he was crying, that he was having a hard time and wanted to completely disgrace their academy. He said that the guy got in here for a bribe. Suho jerked to intervene, but the guy stopped him by the shoulder. The swordsman turned to the village headman with displeasure, but the latter said that it was immediately obvious that the hero was being deliberately angered, and if he intervened, it would be worse. He smirked and suggested that the young man was repeating himself. The interlocutor frowned and asked again. The village headman clenched his fist and reminded him that Suho himself said that Hajin cut off the hand of the human monster, and now he can't answer these guys. At this time, the protagonist tried to lift the barbell, but without success, so the offenders decided that he was joking. The headman scratched the back of his head and muttered that the brunette was just lucky that he was able to destroy that monster. Suho walked towards them, demanding that they stop. The other cadets turned around, interested in what was happening. The teacher burst into the hall and shouted at them what they were doing during training. He raised his hand with a Whatman paper and ordered everyone to gather to find out the results of the exam. The man said that he would hang up a poster and the students would check it themselves. Suho turned around. The cadets were studying the results with interest, checking whether they passed or not. The protagonist was in first place, and after him Rachel. The brunette looked at the poster indifferently and was not surprised because he copied everything. Behind him, a rapier fell to the floor with a clang. The blonde looked at the results in shock. The hero turned around at her in surprise. Rachel Elizabeth Louise, the English princess, ranked 3rd in the Cube entrance exams. In addition, she has never been inferior to others. Always ranked 1st in written exams, no matter how difficult they were. The girl turned to Hajin. The young man sweated and knitted his brows. The palace, Rachel's memories. The subjects congratulated her on entering the cube. The butler and the female knight looked at the girl with concern. The man asked if she was worried, because outstanding and famous heroes from all over the world would gather there. In addition, all classes were held in Korean. The blonde smiled and replied that she would study hard and live up to the expectations placed on her for the glory of the English royal family. She looked at her portrait with her parents. The present tense. Rachel leaned on her hand and mentally apologized to her citizens. The teacher looked at the students and said that Hajin presented a completely new point of view on analyzing the real world. He added that the other cadets should follow his example. The blonde put her pen to her lips and thought that real-world analysis was a rather difficult subject. She decided that she would not catch up with the hero in grades before the midterms. The girl glanced at the brunette sitting in front of her, absent-mindedly looking ahead. Rachel frowned, wondering how the hero usually studied. Information Department Truth, the answer to any question. Hajin tapped his fingers on the keyboard. He thought that since he had gotten the Book of Truth, he should use it properly. At the same time, he would earn some pocket money. With the help of the Book of Truth, one can find out any information about this world if it does not exceed the number of points available. The brunette rubbed his chin and noted that few people knew about it yet, so one should not expect large incomes, but if there were good reviews and recommendations, there would immediately be more clients. He submitted an application to register as a seller. Virtual screens appeared in front of him, and the young man decided that he should invest the accumulated SP. The beginning of the second main story. This meant that the cube was no longer a safe place where human monsters couldn't get in. Hajin looked at the gun and noted that his skills weren't enough to fight them right now, although he had plenty of points, probably due to the bullying of the Jonghak gang. The brunette smiled and thought that he should invest these points and get something that could be useful in a dangerous situation. For starters, he decided to strengthen his gun, the Desert Eagle. The young man began typing on his laptop. Additional properties of the Desert Eagle, gun, sniper rifle. The hero smiled awkwardly and wondered if this was too much. He pressed the key and spent 250 SP. The weapon began to glow until it turned into a rifle. Desert Eagle, sniper rifle. The guy looked at the updated weapon with satisfaction and said that with this thing he could surprise everyone. Now Hajin decided to try to make up techniques. Unlike abilities that cause supernatural phenomena based on magic, techniques are related to physical data or skills. For a shooter, the most important skill is take a position. The boy started typing something. Description: Parker, proficiency 0%. Flexibility and agility of movements. Can be used to move around the terrain, regardless of its relief. The speed and use of the skill depend on intelligence and muscle strength. Notification: You have spent 350 SP. The hero looked at his hand and muttered that he could not feel it now, but the skill was probably used. The bracelet screen began to glow. General message: Has anyone seen Cadet Sunjeon from the world class, who has not been contacted since yesterday? Second victim. The boy looked at the pop-up message. All the cadets who disappeared before Yona was kidnapped were killed by the criminal. The hero knew who was behind it and who would be next. He wondered if he should continue to watch people disappear without a trace. The boy turned pale and started sweating. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. The open-air Cuba training ground. The coach frowned and announced that there would be a special practical training session today. The cave behind him was an artificial dungeon created using magical engineering technology. Inside were imitations of real monsters. The man announced that today they would have dungeon clearing practice. He frowned and shouted for everyone not to relax, thinking that this was just a lesson. In this huge dungeon that could not even be measured, the Veritas and cultivation classes would be having a joint training session today. The students from the two groups exchanged glances. The man pointed to the screen and announced that they would be forming groups, with one team from each class. The students began to split up. Teammate, the Veritas class, Yonha, Hosung, Heizuki and Hajin. Cultivation class, Jadon, Kim Jingwoo, Oh Sujeong, Lai Jingxia. The hero looked at the entrance to the labyrinth. All kinds of traps were set up inside the artificial dungeon. Among them were several traps in the form of human monsters. The boy squeezed the gun and thought that he had made some special bullets just in case. He wondered if he could safely pass this training. The hero looked up. Notification: Change in settings detected. Hajin frowned and sweated when he saw that there were as many as 3 new changes. The boy began to get nervous, not understanding how exactly they had changed. The students around him gradually gathered into teams. Someone shouted, "Did some idiot not hear that they were told to quickly gather in teams?" The girl with a bandage on her face looked at Suho with displeasure and said that he looked stupid. Team 1, the Veritas class, Suho. Cultivation class, Jo Yuna. Notice, Yuna's character personality has become even more mischievous than before. The guy shook her hand and said that it was nice to meet Yonha. Jadon from the cultivation class grabbed the brunette's hand and exclaimed that he hoped to work with her after training too. Notice, Jadon's character growth potential has increased by 0.5. Naeun pointed to the guy standing next to her and clarified that he was on her team and had also appeared in the Hunters Club earlier. The blonde smiled and replied that his name was Sven. Notice, Sven's psychological weakness has increased. There is a high probability of devil servants infiltrating during the dungeon clearing. The protagonist looked back at these two in shock and thought that this was already a disaster. He narrowed his eyes and noted that there were 2 interested parties. First, Jadon from Team 8, arrogant, a weakling in front of the strong and a strongman in front of the weak. He is strong enough to be invited to Essence of the Strait. Notice, Jadon's character growth potential has increased by 0.5. The hero was curious about this growth potential. The brown-haired man pointed to the guys next to him and introduced his team, Kim Jingwoo, Oh Sujeong, Lai Jingxia. Yona stood next to her group and introduced them, mangling the protagonist's last name. The young man frowned and thought that this was okay. Next was Sven from Team 3. The blonde stood nearby and talked to Naeun. He was a German state-funded student, a hero and a promising player who had completed an elite training course. His special feature was his sympathy for Naeun. The guy blushed slightly while talking to her. There were many foreigners studying in Cuba who dreamed of roughly the same thing. Sven was no exception. He entered the academy in the hopes of reaching the very top. However, the reality was not so simple, and due to the skills of the strong cadets, he became one of the ordinary average students. Sven felt his inferiority and defeat for the first time, as well as personal instability due to adolescence. In the end, the blonde sold his soul to the devil to gain power. The guy noted that this content matched what he wrote. The problem was the expression while clearing the dungeon in the notice. The hero rubbed his chin and thought that awakening came prematurely. He hoped that this would not significantly affect the plot. Someone suddenly put a hand on his shoulder and called him. Jaden looked at Hajin with a smile, asking if he was a shooter, and asked him not to hang around like that in the dungeon. The young man shook his hand off and asked him to move away. The interlocutor chuckled and noted that it was not for nothing that all sorts of rumors were circulating about him. The hero clenched his fist and thought that his reputation had been terrible lately. It was all because of the rumors that had spread in the world class. Allegedly, he was using his status as a Cuba cadet to intimidate everyone, and also going to Seoul every weekend and having fun there. It was clear who the source of these rumors was. Thanks to this Jonghak gang, the guy was able to raise his SP quite well. The young man sighed and thought irritably why no one from the team would even stand up for him. The teacher shouted that they would enter one by one, starting with the first team. Jaden approached Yona and said that there were rumors that she was the first among the cadets receiving support. The girl replied that she had heard a lot about him too and suggested that the teams were improperly composed because it was very profitable for them. The guy said that this is usually how it happens. There is always one outstanding player and one who comes in addition. The hero crossed his arms irritably. The coach ordered teammate to enter. The guys went inside. They walked through the cave and drops of water were dripping down from above. Jaden, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped. The team stood at a crossroads and there were many passages in front of them. Yona thoughtfully touched her chin and asked where it would be better to go. The brown-haired man said that the shooter in their team is Jingyu. Suddenly, the main character looked at them and suggested going to room 6. Jaden looked at him irritably and asked why. The brunette suddenly agreed and asked to follow. She pointed at Hajin and said that he did not look very good, but he had a good eye. The young man grinned and thought that she would definitely hurt him somehow. However, they would be able to go the way Naeun chose. If Sven really made a contract with the human monster here today, the archer would have a hard time handling it alone. If something bad happened to her, the whole story would get confused. They couldn't lose her. The team went through entrance 6. Jaden muttered in displeasure that this idiot wanted to attract attention. The protagonist raised an eyebrow and advised him to keep a closer eye on the monsters ahead. The interlocutor asked irritably where he saw them. It was dark. The youth said that there was a salamander ahead. It seemed to be a dungeon switch. Jingyu asked if he should shoot a light arrow. Yona asked him to do so. The boy pulled his bow and launched a shining arrow, illuminating the tunnel. The girl frowned in shock. A salamander, a class 6 monster above average, turned towards them. The team perked up, and the leaders shouted for everyone to prepare for battle, asking if anyone could attack with water attributes. The hero frowned, taking out his gun, and thought that it was not yet time to use it. Yona swung her whip and said that they would attack the center. The girl swung and launched the weapon forward. The salamander opened its mouth, accumulating energy. Suddenly, a whip tied her muzzle, covering her mouth. Sujiang and Heizuki had already jumped on the monster from above. They took turns striking the enemy. The salamander's body glowed and began to disappear. The brunette frowned and noted that the dungeon was changing. Sparks were coming from her weapon. The hero noticed this and thought that Yona had already managed to reach the level of enlightenment. The girl turned around and suggested that they move on. Hajin nodded and thought that she was really amazing. The young man tripped over a stone and fell, leaning on his commander. At that moment, something flashed next to them. They landed on the ground. The hero was sweating, awaiting his fate. The girl demanded to let go, and he instantly jumped away from her. While the brunette was about to end the guy's existence, the others looked away, asking what it was. Hajin and Yona looked at them questioningly. Jinxia and Heizuki looked at the arrow in the wall, not understanding where it came from. The hero thought that the threat of the human monster was probably much stronger than he thought. The boy's eyes widened in realization, which he noticed when they were falling. Description: poisoned arrow. Lethality 4/10. Effect: silent attack. The tip of the arrow is smeared with poison. Someone was walking along the tunnel and breathing heavily. Sven was lying on someone's back with a pierced shoulder. He was sweating and apologized, asking to leave him. Naeun closed her eyes and demanded that her companion shut up, and if he had the strength to talk, then let him get up and run. She did not understand what was happening, because during training sessions there can't be a poisoned arrow that flew out of nowhere. The girl ran forward with the guy behind her. A large monster, leaking lava, followed him. Naeun exclaimed, "Where did such a monster come from in an artificial dungeon?" An artificial dungeon? A training session. Explosions were heard in the corridor. Jinxia put up a shield, reflecting the fire attacks, and the rest of the team fought off the monsters from behind. The small lizards attacked them with powerful force. The sparse-haired girl stuck her shield into the ground, holding it tightly. Jingyu stood next to her and attacked with arrows. He released the bowstring and shot at the monsters. A little further away, Yona and Hajin were fighting. Jaden, with a smug smile, struck with his sword. Another bright flash appeared. Someone brushed the monster's blood off the blade. Jaden threw his sword over his shoulder and asked with a sigh, "It seemed like they almost did it." Most of them were either peanut flame or salamanders, so it was easy. The boys decided that they could move on, since there were no other traps in sight except for that arrow. The protagonist looked ahead carefully. He frowned and thought that even the cadets did not understand what was going on with that arrow. The young man assumed that it was a trap for a training session. He stood among the team and tried to understand what it was. Flames appeared. Hajin's eyes widened. He looked back, noticing a fiery silhouette behind him. The monster opened its mouth, preparing to attack. The young man frowned, seeing the salamander, which turned out to be alive. A powerful pillar of fire was approaching the cadets. Yona turned towards the light. Jaden's eyes widened. Hajin extended his hand and used stigmata magic change. The mark on his hand began to glow. The protagonist gritted his teeth and transformed the power into a water barrier. The fire attack crashed into the shield. The flames were extinguished by the water. A charred trail ran along the floor from the monster to the barrier. The monster let out a sigh and collapsed. Hosung and Heizuki stared at it in shock, surprised by the attack. They were discussing whether it was really a doll, since the heat was real. The hero had his back to them. He looked back when he was called out. Jaden grabbed him in anger and called him names since he had asked about the water attributes earlier. The brunette squeezed his hand and said that it was just the effect of a magic weapon. The swordsman shouted that he did not believe it. Yona extended her hand and said that they did not have time to sort things out. Sujiong frowned and asked what a real monster was doing here instead of a doll. The hero's squad leader looked at her and said that this place was as close to a real dungeon as possible. It was possible that the salamander could have appeared here naturally. She added that they would most likely be able to get extra points for this, so it was better to leave the sorting out for later. She walked in front of him and suggested that they go further. The girl pressed her lips together and thought that Hajin had probably lied about the magic weapon. He couldn't even buy the Desert Eagle himself, so how could he have magic skills? The guy wasn't Suho or Jonghak. The brunette thought that the young man knew important details about the mountain tyrant and had magic skills, but for some reason he was hiding everything so carefully. She remembered Naeun asking if the shooter was a human monster. The brunette glanced sideways at her companion. Lava was bubbling below. A large stone fire monster stood there. The cadets determined that it was a class 5 mid-level magma monster. Most likely, this was the main monster of the dungeon. The swordsman and Naeun looked down. He asked if they could handle it. The girl said that it would be difficult with their forces. She suggested hiding until another team arrived to join forces. The interlocutor noted that Sven needed treatment. The archer wondered where the arrow had come from. She thought the training was too difficult. Behind them lay a blonde man. He clenched his hand. The pale boy mentally apologized to the team for getting hit by an arrow. Sven thought he was always in situations like this after coming to the cube. Tears were streaming from his eyes. It was very hard for him. Suddenly a voice was heard, a child. The young man asked who it was. The voice asked if he wanted to become stronger since he had had a hard time. The demon promised to give him strength. The blonde man tiredly opened his eyes. An outstretched hand appeared in his mind. The voice said that the price for strength was small, much less than giving everything. The boy rose up. He held out his hand, and tears were streaming from his reddened eyes. Sven said that he wanted to become stronger. The demon squeezed his hand tightly. The dark creature pulled the student towards itself, declaring that he was caught. The blonde man opened his mouth and began to scream loudly. The cadets turned to look at the young man lying on the floor. The archer ran up, asking what was wrong with him. She turned around and asked why they were standing there. The red eye of the monster was watching them. It heard a scream and found them. The monster opened its mouth. A scream demanding to run was heard in the background. The monster released a stream of lava. The hand reached forward, and the monster hit the columns. The cadets ran along the corridor, led by Naeun, who was dragging a wounded man on her back. The enemy hit again. Several students flew into the air. The archer was on all fours near the collapsed bridge, and a blonde man was lying in front of her. The girl closed her eyes and cleared her throat. The head of the monster appeared in front of Naeun. She widened her eyes and thought that this could not be an ordinary doll. The archer sat up and was afraid that this was the end for her, and would she really die here? The monster opened its mouth, from which a glow burst out. A blue bullet cut through the air and hit the monster. Water flowed off him, and he turned his head. Naeun looked inquiringly in that direction. The main character stood opposite. He frowned, clutching a gun in his hand. A few minutes ago, the group stopped in front of a blockage blocking the way. Jaden looked at Hajin with displeasure and said that the main monster's zone was visible here. The young man frowned and replied that this was the right way. He thought that this wall had not been there just now, but that was not important now. The hero turned to the swordsman and said that the main monster's zone was behind this wall, so let him try to break it. The interlocutor took the blade and was indignant. Did the brunette imagine himself a master? He frowned and swung the weapon. Sparks flew from the stone. A shudder ran through his body. Jaden shouted irritably, "Was that enough?" The hero's eyes widened, surprised that even a blow with magic did not work. Heizuki pointed her finger up. The young man noticed that there was a gap at the top of the arch. Hajin came closer and said that then it would be possible to get through it. The swordsman asked what nonsense he was talking about. Because this wall was at least 10 meters high, he couldn't climb it. Hajin raised his hand and said that he would be the first then. A glow began to emanate from him. The young man used a technique. In a few jumps, he reached the top and grabbed the stone. The cadet climbed into the crack and darted to the other side. His teammates assumed that he had cats in his family. Suddenly, the ground shook and they looked ahead in alarm. Small stones fell from the ceiling. Jaden frowned and cursed, asking what was going on. The monster froze in front of the archer, water running down its body. The hero shuddered and asked how the enemy thawed so quickly. The monster was shaking. Hajin shouted for Naeun to pull herself together and move. The girl shuddered, coming out of her stupor. A shadow was approaching the young man. He turned pale and muttered that she would save him later. A cry was heard, battle position. They began to shoot at the monster from different sides. Fire beams flew through, breaking stones. The cadets attacked, but saw that the enemy did not even move. The archer looked at them happily and smiled. She pulled the bowstring. Naeun stood up and aimed at the monster. The girl frowned and asked to take a little time. The other students continued to attack the enemy. One guy picked up Sven and ran with the main character. Someone pushed off the ground. The monster's eye widened. A quick blow knocked out several stones on its mouth. The blonde said words of apology. He landed on the monster, clutching a katana, and said that he was too late. The young man gracefully jumped, attracting the enemy's attention. At that moment, the archer held him at gunpoint. She remembered the time she had been helpless in front of the human monster. Naeun frowned and said that this time it would be different. She released the bowstring and a powerful projectile pierced the monster. The smoke gradually dissipated. The extinguished fragments of the monster lay on the ground, and lava flowed out from under them. The cadets looked at him and muttered that they really destroyed the magma monster. They hoped that they would at least get points for this. Naeun and Sven approached them. The girl asked if everything was okay. The protagonist watched as the archer was asked how she did it. Hajin noted that the blonde had not yet completely become a human monster. The plot was slightly different from the original book. He stood and looked at the archer with a smile. The hero frowned and thought that the process was just slower because Sven had already made a contract with the devil. The situation had become more serious because it was unknown when he would break through. Naeun looked towards the archer. He was sitting on a rock. The girl frowned but called out to him. The young man looked at her. They exchanged glances, but neither of them said anything. The hero looked at her in shock. The girl said that she had to tell him that. She blushed and looked away, but thanked him. Hajin's eyes widened in surprise. He got goosebumps and asked again. The girl kicked the floor and shouted that she had simply said that. The young man looked at her in confusion, not believing that she had thanked him. Naeun's life had been nothing but tragedy. The first tragedy happened on her 6th birthday. She lost her mother to human monsters and then decided to become a hero. At that age, other ordinary children laugh and misbehave, but the archer trained herself to exhaustion. She couldn't make close friends with anyone, because to extend a hand to someone meant to show one's weakness. Therefore, few heard words of gratitude from Naeun. The girl turned away in embarrassment, putting her hand on her hip. The real friends who stayed by her side could be counted on the fingers, and even more rarely could one hear gratitude and apologies, as well as from the hero himself, the author of the book. He stared ahead in confusion. The archer raised an eyebrow and asked why he tolerated Jonghak's bullying if he was so strong. She added that the brunette stopped that magma monster and with such abilities he could have simply fought back. The guy looked at her and replied that even if he got into a fight, he would not be able to win, so he tolerated it. The interlocutor objected that she saw a powerful pistol on him. Hajin picked up the weapon and explained that he made it himself. She ran closer and whispered in confusion that he would be kicked out of the academy if caught. The interlocutor replied that this was why he only used it when necessary. He put his hand on his knee and thought that he now understood how to hide weapons in the stigmata, so now no one would catch him and kick him out. The girl frowned and said that he was still too strong. She enthusiastically raised her finger and asked if he by any chance had a weapon enhancement skill. The hero said that she could think as she wanted. The archer turned around and waved her hand, saying that she knew it and would not tell anyone. Naeun stopped and asked if he wanted to tell her something. The brunette looked at her back, then turned away and said no. If the guy apologized now for speaking ill of her brother, then she would surely forgive him. However, he could not do that. It would be better for him to remain a simple acquaintance at a distance. Naeun returned to her teammates. The protagonist reminded himself that he had to kill her brother, Jinyun. The other girl looked at the archer with a smile and asked if she was friends with Hajin. She frowned and said no. Sven looked at her with crazy eyes, but said nothing. There was a sound. The girl raised her head. An announcement was heard addressed to all the cadets. The voice ordered them to stop clearing the dungeon immediately and leave the dungeon. During the training session on clearing the dungeon, some problems were discovered. Several cameras inside the dungeon suddenly stopped working after the session began. Instead of magic dolls, real monsters entered the dungeon. There was a mix-up with the distribution of trainers, so these problems were discovered much later. Despite the seriousness of the incident, due to the lack of casualties, Cuba decided not to involve external forces, but to conduct an internal investigation. The protagonist leaned on his hand, sitting at his desk, and thought that the human monsters who occupied leadership positions in Cuba managed to hush up this matter. The investigation of the incident will take place in the second episode. Hajin drew an angry face in a notebook and questions about why that guy didn't turn into a human monster. Now he needs to focus on the problem of Sven. The consequences of a contract with the devil are increased sensitivity and obsession. If the blonde's emotions reach the limit and explode when he is alone with Naeun, something terrible can happen. The hero put his hand on the laptop and thought that it was worth watching how the relationship between these two would develop in order to prevent such a situation. He opened the messenger, which had more than 99 unread messages. The guy closed his eyes and thought that he was a little ashamed, but he would just check and immediately turn it off. Notification: you have entered Naeun's messenger. The last 3 dialogues were with Suho, Sven and Jonghak. The blonde wrote that the hunting club was going to Gangwon-do this week and asked her to make a bet. According to the plot, the guy will have a breakdown on that day. The young man looked at his laptop and decided that it would be better to go with them. He needed to be properly prepared, just in case. The brunette looked ahead and thought that he had also grown up a bit, so it was time to go into the dungeon on Mount Gari. His bracelet beeped again. The hero looked at it questioningly, not understanding why he was calling him. He picked up the phone. Suho smiled and greeted Hajin by the call. The swordsman asked if the shooter would have time on Friday. The brunette stared at the bracelet in surprise. The interlocutor said that he had one request. If you look around, this is a famous place in the province of Gangwon-do, where energy and spirit are mixed, so this mountain has long been called a training mountain, where warriors from all over the country came. However, not only warriors came here, there were also seekers of treasures hidden in the depths of the mountain, such as this root. Opposite the main character stood a guy and said that people like him are collectors of mountain ginseng. The boy just looked at him and listened silently. Then he agreed, and after that there was an awkward pause. For some time the guys stood in the forest and discussed why they were staring at some map they could miss the main thing, and the boy replied that he was not looking for ginseng here, but for one place. In response he heard that it was good. All young people who are just starting to do this say so, but if he hopes for quick enrichment, then it is in vain. The young man did not answer him. Then the seeker wished him luck and said goodbye. At that moment he heard just agreement. And while he was leaving he thought that this newbie still has a lot to learn. At that very second, the main character stumbled and asked what kind of roots the tree had, and behind him he saw that very ginseng root. He was very surprised and realized that he had found what he was looking for. The guy immediately picked it up and of course decided to eat it. At that moment he hugged the tree and thought that he was now chewing ginseng roots for a 7-year-old. If he changed the settings, then within 30 minutes he would be able to increase his variable skills by 2 points. Then he closed his eyes and thought that if he sold everything completely, he could earn about 700 million. It was even a bit of a pity. And a second later he fell and almost flew straight down. All this time the young man remained on the cliff, reasoning that it was very high there, so no one had been able to find him in the middle of the rocks on the mountain, where there were many different caves and moss. He found a passage. He grabbed the edge and reached there. An immortal dungeon was hidden there. Finally, the young man stood in front of the entrance and nothing threatened. True, the boss of this dungeon, Beginning Death, a first-class monster of the middle level, thanks to ginseng became stronger, but now his strength is not enough to defeat him, and he also looked quite frightening. Nevertheless, the boy went inside and thought that it did not matter anymore. The same hand burst out of the ground, and after it, terrible skeletons stretched. All this was happening right before his eyes. Then the guy clenched his fist and thought that today his target was not the boss, although he would have had to fight anyway, because at that moment he was already surrounded by a herd of opponents. He was interested in the hidden stage in this dungeon. A moment later, he pressed his sleeve, and a second later, he presented the gun directly to the jaw of one of the skulls. A shot immediately rang out. The monster discharged into different pieces, and after him, several more opponents were destroyed. The eyes of the protagonist were burning at that moment, and in his head there were thoughts about 1000 lie, and it was necessary to check the route. It was clear that he had to move over the opponents, who were getting closer and closer to him. And then it was decided to move along the ceiling. The boy found himself at the top and began to shoot the skulls from there. In the cave, only explosions from the shot were heard. Finally, it was all over. The gun was even smoking from the work done. The guy looked around and said that it seemed that everyone was ready. And while he was walking forward, he thought that the number of dead people was gradually increasing. This meant that he was approaching the Evangel base. This girl is a witch, the boss of the hidden stage in the dungeon of the mountain. Later she will build a castle of the most terrible bath of the dead in an abandoned school in Suwon. It will look very scary. Meanwhile, the young man continued to walk further and thought that this is okay. The reason why he is hunting her today lies in 2 items that he can get. Then he imagined some crystal. The first is a weapon of a growing type, ether, and the seed of a witch. According to the plot, they made Jin Tomer, the characters of the book, a monster leader of monsters. Ether will just help him grow quickly, will envelop him from the inside. Finally, the guy came to the end of this cave. Then he said 1000 lie again, and everything around began to shake and then completely seeded the walls. There appeared a tree covered with crystals, and below sat a little girl. When the young man noticed her, he thought that it would be quite difficult to fight against an adult witch. She must be killed in childhood when she is not yet developed either physically or intellectually. The little girl at that moment was just sitting and playing with something. Then she touched it and it exploded. This surprised her. The brunette just watched silently all this time. Then he clenched his fist and thought that he needed to pull himself together. He needed to do this. Even the character in the book did it. Rolling up his sleeves, he thought that in any case, he himself created her. Then he raised his hand and activated his energy. When the first shot occurred, he reasoned that the witch was in a state of mind, so she could not be killed with a gun, then it would be necessary to do it with magic. It turned out that it was not a shot, but the activation of a spear of light magic. The boy took a step forward and said that ginseng turned out to be good after all. Then he swung and compared himself to Yuyona, after which he threw this spear straight at the little girl. Everything around was covered with a bright light. The guy covered his eyes with his hands and did not understand what happened. And a second later he realized that his target was still alive. Her body was falling apart and her eyes showed incomprehension. And then black magic began to generate around. The baby tried to say something, but a second later she simply dissolved. The brunette froze for a while because of this spectacle and said that he did not understand what it was, life or an object state. However, her seed was lying on the ground, which contains the soul of the witch. If this seed sprouts, the witch of despair will be born, and ether also appeared, a weapon in a liquid state. Has no specific shape, sticks to the weapon and the owner, strengthening the essence, possibly transforming into a weapon formula. This is a growing type of weapon, grows with the owner. Information also appeared that all these items were collected. Night fell. The status of the new book was landed with information that due to the effect of the ether, all indicators increased by 0.6 points, and at the same time it cannot change the user. The indicators were as follows: muscle strength 2.455, endurance 2.545, intelligence 2.85, sensitivity 3.705, health 2.465, magic power 1.925. He was surprised and said that this effect is quite good. Then he tried to use the ether, said that if it grows, it will only get better. Now he even likes being a cadet of Cuba. Then he smiled and added that he received about 47 points. The rest of the ginseng invested in the purple banquet. It will be bought soon, but the most important thing is that this baby is profitable. In front of him lay the seed of Evangel. Characteristics: a seed containing the soul of a witch. If this seed sprouts, the witch of despair will be born. The young man leaned over and said that this is a terrible name, but if she is raised correctly, she can become a good ally. Then he dripped blood on this seed and thought that it would be very easy to grow. You need to give it a little blood instead of water. But the growth and character of the witch will depend on whose blood the seed feeds on. You should approach this issue seriously. The contenders for this role were his friends, to whom he offered to give him a little blood. They asked in surprise if this was a joke. Then they got angry and expelled him, and also called him a pervert. It is for this reason that the guy now raised 7 and said that it is better to put it off for now because he did not know how to find blood. Then he went to the laptop, said that today he needs to go to bed early. On the screen it was written about the hunting club, regular hunting on Thursdays, said that tomorrow would be a difficult day. The next day has come, you can move to the province, Mountain Spring. There the girl shouted as everyone gathered. Then she spread her hands and said that she was pleased to see everyone collected and prepared, because for the first time they see after the first meeting. The boys listened attentively, that for those who were not there last time, and once again will tell about the purpose of their club. In their hunting club are held regular meetings, where everyone hunts harmful animals, which allows them to do what they like and at the same time bring benefit to society. The young man at this moment thought about what today in the episode, and he himself does not know, since he wrote only a short ending. And the ending was like this: as a result of the battle with the human monsters, the girl was seriously injured, and Sven died. This incident was only needed to make Suho pay attention to Naeun when she was seriously injured. It is necessary to make everyone think that this girl was the target of these monsters, and while the search party will closely watch her, something incredible will happen. There was blood all over the floor, and the hero's thoughts were that here it is necessary to pay attention to the fact that Sven's history has changed a little. He has not exploded yet, and controls the power of the devil, although very little, fights with opponents, and actively wins. And now in the present tense, the young man turned and thought that if this blonde man disappears from the book now, there will be nothing to worry about, but if he is attacked now, he will be swept away. Suddenly, the girl looked at him and thought, is it really possible that they are looking at her like that now? Then she was completely confused and thought that this guy was pretending that he was not interested, but he was constantly hanging around. Did he really fall in love with her? At that moment, the blonde turned to her and told her to be careful. In response, she received a question: with whom, if not with this guy? And when Sven said that he meant those disappearances, the girl was surprised. She said that that guy was not like that, but in response, her friend simply remained silent. Finally, they announced that they could slowly go, and the guys went ahead together, and the main character walked behind and watched them carefully. In the forest nearby, there was a deer, and then some black energy appeared next to it. Thanks to this energy, they pierced him in 2 places, poor animal. Then they wrapped their tentacles around his neck and began to strangle him. It turned out that it was Sven. While he was killing the poor deer, they began to look for him. So I had to withdraw my forces and look away. His girlfriend came out from behind the bushes and said that she had finally found him, offered to watch, said that she had won the bet today, but was suddenly very surprised. In front of her stood a friend with a whole mountain of deer, and immediately a question came up: how did he even manage to collect so many? The guy came closer and said that this time the victory was his. In response, he heard what it meant. She would have to fulfill his wishes. What does he want? The blonde lowered his head and began to say something embarrassed. Then he looked into her eyes and began to propose. The guys were standing opposite each other. At that moment, the main character was peeping at them from the bushes. He thought that this man had made a contract with the demon of lust. Then he took a step forward and thought that when he vomits and becomes a monster, he will forget about such a word as patience. Meanwhile, Sven finally gathered his strength and asked his girlfriend to go out. She was surprised and asked again. The blonde asked if she really didn't want to, and in response he heard that it was natural, since we'd known each other for less than a week, and he himself could have accepted such an offer, but he just looked at her and said nothing. And the main character was still sitting in the bushes. He frowned and thought that he needed to show the essence of the monster, and waited for the right moment. The girl herself said something strange at that moment, saying that she also liked those who were stronger than her. The blonde was simply shocked by this news, after which his friend turned around and apologized to him. He began to gather his energy and asked if it was true. If he was stronger than her, would she like it? Naeun turned around and told him that he needed to know when to stop, and she didn't even notice that his tentacles were flying at her from the other side. After which there was an explosion. The blonde stood in place for some time, but then he noticed something. A bright energy appeared in front of him, and it turned out that the main character was able to protect the girl, transforming the ether into a bill. Then he turned to her and asked if everything was okay, not even noticing another projectile. For a second, he was lifted up and thrown aside. The little girl tried to grab her bow to protect him, but it was broken, and the brunette at that moment was already hanging in the air. He was being strangled by dark forces. There was nothing to do. Nevertheless, his friend decided to use the concentration of magical powers and tried to help him, shouting for that idiot to let him go. Suddenly, they also began to attack her and say that they loved her. In front of her was no longer a person, a familiar blonde. There was a huge monster who continued to address her and say that he loved her. Therefore, the girl concentrated all her energy and thought that this bastard was now dangerous. The main character, meanwhile, was still trying to break free. Then he looked down and saw a bright light below. This bright light filled everything around. He thought that sometimes in this world, some characters with high potential choose a weapon that is not quite suitable for them and cannot reveal themselves to the fullest. But nevertheless, it seems that she has succeeded now. Although this girl was a shining example before. Suddenly, a huge sword appeared above her head, which even made the young man a little embarrassed. The girl herself frowned and ordered the monster to let him go. Then the light became even brighter and surprised both of those present there. A second later, there was an explosion. Everything in the area began to shake. A trace formed in front of him. There were remnants of this person's energy. The girl then looked at her hand and did not understand what was happening. And the young man approached her and asked what it was it really some kind of laser sword? Here is the answer. He heard that she did not know and asked if everything was okay. The guy turned and just looked away, then answered that everything was fine. The girl smiled and asked if it was true. Then she began to lose consciousness and said that it was good. After which she fell to the ground, and the young man immediately ran to her. Night fell, she finally came to her senses. She immediately jumped up and realized that she was on her comrade's back. There were screams right away after he asked if she had woken up. She still hadn't woken up, so he decided to carry her on his back, asked what was going on and ordered him to let her go to the ground right away. While her comrade was carrying her in his arms, he asked if she really wanted to go down, and in response he heard that he had to let her go quickly. He put her on the ground and agreed, and the girl herself fell down a second later. She was overcome with horror and confusion about what was happening. While she was sitting on the ground, she asked why her legs wouldn't obey, what was wrong with them. The brunette turned around and asked if she had magical exhaustion for the first time. Then the girl raised her head and looked at him without understanding what was happening. The young man immediately explained that magical exhaustion is a condition when the internal supply of magical powers is depleted and the speed of magic recovery decreases, but this was the only information she knew. For some time, the guys discussed that she wouldn't be able to move normally for a couple of days, so they had to climb on his back if they didn't want to sit here for the rest of their lives. So they walked through the forest. Suddenly the young man asked a question whether he would use a bow. The girl asked what kind of stupid question it was, and then she was surprised when she heard that she herself had felt it today. She did not understand it, but she had discovered her abilities. This is an incredible power that can infinitely enhance skills if only there is a conductor of magical powers, a sword capable of destroying a huge number of monsters and even human monsters with one blow. In a large-scale battle there will be no one who can stop her. She will be able to become a queen in a battlefield. This is a truly shocking skill. And for the sake of such a future, she should leave the bow now. Because of this the girl got very angry. Then she began to wave her hands and asked what this man even understands. He walked forward and thought that it seemed like it was still far away. After some time, he sat her down on a bench and said that from here the checkpoint was already visible. Then she had to move on her own, and her friend had a question where the young man was going alone. He turned around and said that the dorm had already reached curfew and that he had to go, despite the fact that he was asked to stop and take her with him. Morning came, everyone was discussing whether they had heard the news. The students were standing in the hallway and talking about how another student was attacked by a monster man. It turned out to be Sven, and it was unclear when he managed to become a monster. They had exchanged a few words once, but why was the management silent? Meanwhile, the main characters approached office 303. He went inside and saw something. His comrades were standing there, calling him to come closer. All the guys he knew were there, and everyone was looking at him at that moment. All these people had gathered here and were the most significant figures who were waiting for him. But let's fast forward to the day before the incident. In the hunting club he raised his hand and received a message asking if there was time on Friday. He had one request. Then the brunette was surprised and thought that this was a request. What exactly? And then he was surprised when he read that they were asking him if they knew about the disappearance of students. In connection with this, the cube entrusted them to conduct an investigation. Now it was clear what was happening. In order not to involve outside forces, the Cuba leadership chose several students from each year and entrusted them with the mission of catching the criminal while marking them with certain bracelets. At that very moment, his girlfriend called out to him and asked if she was coming with them. He asked to wait a minute and thought that the representatives of this team were first-year students. After which he received another message that this was natural. The Cuba would also take measures. There was a high probability that the criminal could be cadets. These people believed that an internal investigation would be easier to conduct. And the young man was already sitting at the table, said that he understood what they meant, but why they called him. In response he heard that he had good eyesight, heard that he could see 1,000 lie ahead. And then they said that he was recommended. The brunette was surprised by this news. The dialogue continued for some time. He was asked if he would help. And today, when he had already arrived there, Suho met him and thanked him for coming. He was only better, at least he would earn points. The comrade then extended his hand and said that since everyone was here, they could begin. Before they started speaking about the incident, he would like to share his hypothesis. They believe that the criminal is a human monster who attacked their friend. However, suddenly, someone hit the floor so hard that it began to crumble. It was a blonde guy who was sitting in one of the stands. Then this guy raised his head and asked about the girl. The blue-haired boy simply repeated her name, only this time in full. Then he introduced her and said that in general, it is quite possible that the next target will be the human monster. He follows the orders of the demon. If the demon who made a contract with Sven was hunting specifically for her, then other human monsters will also attempt on her life, and asked if they had anyone under suspicion. He also added that perhaps one of their acquaintances was acting strangely. Now the main character thought about it. After which he introduced the blonde and thought that he knew who the real criminal was, but he thought that it would be too dangerous to rush to reveal his name, so he just waited for everything to resolve itself. After which he thought that unlike the book, where 6 victims appeared in 2 months, here 3 people had already disappeared in 2 weeks. At this rate there could be many more victims, and it would turn into a bloody mess. He sat there squeezing his hand all this time. At that very second, the girl raised her head and thanked everyone around her. The guy thought that he did not want to stay on the sidelines and expose them to danger any longer. His eyes began to sparkle. His thoughts were about the fact that he could not wait for events to develop. Therefore, he raised his hand and said that he had one person in mind. He looked at the others and said that the leader of the Hyun nightclub, who was acting quite suspiciously. Everyone looked at him and remained silent. Then someone said that he had an alibi. He was in a close relationship with the first victim, so they checked him, even talked to him personally. After which, to the question of what if the victim came to him herself, the blonde turned and asked if he really thought that some kind of suggestion magic could have worked on the cadet. The main character raised his head and said that it could not, if we are talking about ordinary suggestion magic, however, but he was interrupted. The girl intervened in the conversation, who said that something was wrong here, that everyone was picking on a person who had an alibi. Then she looked at them and added that it seemed to her more likely that not the leader of the club, but this guy was the human monster. This news shocked him and immediately followed the question of whether this was said seriously. Before this, the main character sat in front of the computer and reasoned that there should be at least one character who would help. He continued to write and thought that a rich character was needed who would help Suho. Her character is a little tough, but not completely disgusting. Maybe insert the detail that she loved ordinary people. Then he smiled and said that her name was Yuyeon. Let's go back to real time. The girl sat and watched that it was more likely that this man, not the leader of the club, was a monster. The young man asked again in surprise. Then Suho looked at her and said that he had an alibi. He used the portal when the crime was committed. And the girl lowered her eyes and said that she also just decided to check because it is possible to fabricate a record of using the portal. The young man immediately jumped up and asked what kind of nonsense was this. Then he heard scary words, a question about what might be worth starting from the back. A huge guy approached him, who said that from the blow he himself would begin to change. Right. The blonde watched all this and smiled. Another person also just watched silently, but their leader, Suho, was shocked. The brown-haired man lowered his head and said nothing, and the one who approached him asked if he really chickened out, now how he would hit him. Only then the main character raised his head and said that this guy could try to do it, but in return he would get a hole between the eyes. Their friend intervened in the conversation and told them to stop. They shouldn't mess with each other, they both need to calm down. After which the brown-haired guy looked at them and said that if they doubted him, then they could ask the girl. They were together at the club that day. And then some sword flew at his head. It turns out it was the blonde guy who threw it right at the stance. He looked up and turned to him, asking how he even dared to talk about her. The guy replied that when she was attacked, they killed that monster man together, or hadn't heard about it yet, while he was having fun with his gang. He jumped up and started insulting him, but suddenly his friend stopped him and asked him to recover. At that moment, Hajin turned around and said that he thought he knew the culprit. He was immediately stopped and asked where he was going. But the guy confidently continued to move towards the doors. Then he tripped, and thanks to the fact that he bent down, he did not get hit in the back. While the young man was falling, the one who was running after him broke the door with his fist. Everyone saw this and was very scared. But the big guy looked at his target and asked if he had dodged. The guy immediately pulled out a gun and said that he would have to teach him a lesson. Then he pulled it out and was ready to shoot. Only some energy suddenly stopped him. It was Suho, who pulled out his sword and blocked the attack. He looked at the guys, turned to the attacker and said that he should know when to stop. Then he looked at the blonde and said that he should also control himself. If there were any doubts, he could ask the girl. Then the brunette intervened, asking them to wait. Silence reigned in the corridor, and through the office, the main character came out. The brunette at that moment was talking to her friend, who asked if this Hajin could not be a monster, then asked if Yona heard. He simply remained silent. If you move along the school corridor, you can notice that someone did leave. It was the main character, who at that moment had already gone outside. There was complete darkness around. After some time, the guy sat down in the forest and began to reason. He could not understand what the hell was happening now. He also thought that not only did he end up in his own book, but now he was arguing with the characters he himself had created with great love, and moments from writing the script flashed in his memories. And now he was sitting on the grass and saying how fed up he was with everything. He thought that he really missed his parents and friends, wanted to go back to his apartment. According to the contract, he had 1 more year left, and so many pleasant memories immediately flooded in. He also thought that it was interesting what was happening now in his world if time goes by without changes. Then he was declared missing, and the apartment was probably just empty. Then the young man grabbed his head and thought about his parents. What if they were looking for him everywhere, and what if they were crying because of him? While he was sitting, he thought that he did not understand at all whether he would ever be able to return home. Suddenly a status window appeared in front of his face. It said that his perseverance indicators had increased. After reading this information, he simply laughed. Then he smiled and said that he didn't seem to quite understand what was going on. He looked at this information again and thought that it was good that the indicators had increased. He would have given up on the idea of returning home earlier. Then he wiped his tears. He stood up, shook himself off. After which he looked ahead and decided to continue on his way. Meanwhile, the guys in the room were still assembled. One of them raised his head and asked what was wrong with Hajin. In response, he heard from his comrade that it was better not to touch him now. The other two were then sitting downstairs and were silent. The girl decided to ask her comrade if he recognized his skill. Then she turned around and asked if some shooter had dodged a fighter's attack and which of them was more suspicious. She immediately received a notification on her watch. It was a message from Hyun with an offer to meet tomorrow in the training room before the meeting. She read it and said nothing. At the same time, the blonde himself was somewhere nearby. He received a notification with her consent, and his whole face and body were covered in blood. It seems that this was our villain who looked at this and laughed. After some time, everyone gathered in the classroom. Now it was clear why they advise to do things when there is a bad mood. Usually when they train or go hunting, they are too tired, so there is no time to think about something else. Now the main character was sitting in a bad mood and understood that now everything was clear to him. After which he looked at his comrades and thought why everyone was behaving like this. Stop thinking about him. Everything is fine. He even felt awkward. Then he frowned and thought that he himself created these characters. What is he doing? Stop doing stupid things. We need to think about how to get home. At the same moment, a girl entered the office. The blonde approached her and asked if she can already go to school. In response, he heard that there is nothing to do at home anyway. Then Suho approached her and extended his hand. She immediately asked what was wrong with him and said that she can get there herself. The blonde ordered him not to touch her. He began to get angry and told him to try. At that moment, the brunette was sitting at her desk and just watching them. Suddenly, someone shouted that the lesson had already started, to go to class, and everyone headed there. There was a teacher on the stage who said that everyone already knew that there was less than a week left until the midterm exams. Then he added that immediately after the written exam, practical testing would begin. It was divided into 2 parts, according to which they would be assessed. He imagined a battle between students and said that the first was a duel between cadets. He also imagined a battle with a monster and said that the second was a battle with a monster that a wizard would produce. Then he looked around and said that both tests would be held at a different level of difficulty, different from the ones they had mastered in class. This must be kept in mind and be prepared. At that moment, the main characters thought that passing the written exam was not that difficult. He was more worried about the duel. Then he presented the student cards and thought that each participant is given 3 cards from which he must choose an opponent. At first glance it may seem that high-ranking cadets will immediately choose weak opponents to earn points. In this way, they could easily win, but to prevent such situations, a bonus point system was developed in the cube. For example, even if a strong cadet wins a duel with a weak student, the winner can go into the minus, since the number of points depends on the difference in the level of the cadets, and this will be quite unpleasant. After which he looked at his new enemy and thought that naturally, there will be those who do not care about this system. They simply use the right to choose an opponent to defeat someone they do not like. In Moscow, this guy is all muscles, of course. Then he turned away and thought that he was worried about something else. Suddenly, his hand moved to the side. While the blonde was sitting next to him, his thoughts were about the fact that the distance between them had clearly decreased. Then he looked at her and thought that she was not saying anything, but continued to hang around him, before she always sat alone at the last desk and studied. Then the girl turned around and the thought occurred to her that she was probably copying. So the young man took out a pen, and he began to write names on the notebook. She saw this and was surprised. These were the names of his parents. After the lesson, the girl received a message from a friend that he had already arrived and was sitting in the classroom, so there was no need to hurry. She read this and went on. After some time, she finally reached her destination, and when she went inside, she looked around. There was a friend waiting for her, who smiled and embarrassedly asked if she had already arrived. The little girl closed the door behind her and replied that it looked like the others were not there yet. In response, she heard that they would be there soon. She could sit down. It seemed to embarrass her, and when she approached the table, she saw a lit candle. The young man said that they say this aroma helps to concentrate, because now they will study. Then he turned to her and added that he heard that she had joined the team to search for human monsters. and was also a member and represented the second year, which surprised her. After which the guy said sheepishly that they had no results so far, asked what their group was doing and if there were any suspects, and in response he heard that there weren't any yet, but there was one person who was talking nonsense. The guy came closer to her and asked again about the nonsense. Then he started snapping his fingers strangely and asked which ones exactly. The brunette didn't understand what was going on and said that she was saying that her friend was also a human monster, but at that moment her soul became calmer, after which she extended her hand to the side and added that he had said that her comrade was using magic that affected the mind, which was simply unheard of. The friend replied that he had no evidence. The brunette nodded her head and confirmed this. Then she opened her eyes and was very surprised. She looked at her comrade and asked again about the evidence. He got scared and said that he expressed himself incorrectly and meant, on what basis did he make such an assumption? But now it made no sense. The girl became wary. She took out her weapon and said that usually, when an innocent person is suspected of something, he does not ask if there is evidence. And a second later she tried to strike. Then she took a pose and asked, "Who is this?" The young man simply smiled in response, after which he came closer and asked what was wrong with her. Her reflection was in his eyes, and black magic was hovering around, and it sounded like her turn had not yet come. Meanwhile, it was quiet in the second-year dormitory. Finally, the little girl came to her senses after losing consciousness, and when she finally opened her eyes, she realized that she was tied up. The sun was already rising outside the window. In addition, music was playing in the room. Looking around, the girl realized that this was the second-year dormitory. This information made her feel sick and uneasy. The comrade was also in this room. It immediately became clear that this person was really guilty of the disappearances of the students. It turns out that he is a monster of a person, and these were not just stupid guesses. The image of the main character who warned her surfaced in her memories. The girl immediately began to try to get out and thought that she needed to calm down and also try to ask for help. Her hands were tightly tied. It was difficult to move her name, and panic covered her more and more. While the girl twitched, she thought that she would like to get help from someone. But suddenly a blonde man came up to her and said that she would not succeed. Then he smiled and asked what was going on. At that moment, a new message came to the Hajin bracelet. He raised his hand and asked who it could be at such a time. The message was from her. The guy immediately looked up and asked again, did not understand what it meant. The message contained only one number, 9. At that moment, the kidnapper snatched the watch from her hand. Then he raised it up and asked what they would think if he wrote like that in the middle of the night. He smiled and said that Hajin quickly guessed that this man was a monster and he would have to finish him off later. The girl immediately screamed that she really thought he would get away with it. The search party was probably already on the trail and had begun to act. And the guy simply crushed her watch and replied that it did not matter because he would soon leave the cube. The little girl at that moment simply continued to be angry. The comrade came closer to her and said that he liked that expression. Then he smiled and added that the lady told him that she would like to see horror on him as well. The protagonist in his room was still trying to understand what kind of message with the number 9 was. He looked at his watch, wondering if she had sent it by accident. The number 9 was spinning in his head, and suddenly it dawned on him that it was 911. He jumped up and shouted about the Book of Truth, asked where this girl was now. A book immediately appeared in his hands, and the information from there scared him a lot. It was not clear what it was. The brunette was almost infuriating, sitting in captivity. Something was asking her because she was lonely. This creature said that it knew what this feeling was, but the girl did not pay attention. The comrade influenced her with his power and was happy about it. But then he noticed something. In her eyes, only aggression was still visible. Then he came closer and said that she had a pretty strong will. He put in so much effort, but she still did not give in. She just needed to open her mind to him once. And then he reached out to her neck and added that she should not be afraid. Lilith herself allowed it. The guy touched her head and added that Lilith wanted to meet her. And the girl then pushed away and immediately heard that even if he untied himself, it would not save her. The guy's face changed dramatically and he said with a laugh that you can't hide from magic and you can't run away. But a moment later someone pierced his head. Glass and his blood flew around. The brunette watched this and did not understand what was happening. Her ex-friend fell to the floor and screamed in pain right before her eyes. Then she heard someone come and say that he doesn't trust people, he constantly doubts. What has he come to? The monster man turned around and asked what kind of bastard did this. And when he got up, he heard that there was no hope of recovery. This projectile was treated with a special solution. It can only be removed through surgery. After which he stretched out his hand and called his attacker a son of a bitch, asked where he was now, ordered him to come out. And then he waved his hand, activating his black magic. This magic destroyed even the remaining glass, and also flew towards the girl, and because of this, she fell to the ground and hit her head. But the kidnapper himself still had not found the attacker. He only heard that he should not strain himself so much and continued asking where he was. The main character, meanwhile, raised his gun again and said that he was now very far away, and a second later he shot him straight in the chest again. The blonde lost a lot of blood and began to scream in pain. The blow was so strong that he fell to the floor again. If you look closely, there was someone somewhere far away, behind the bushes. Right in the trees there was hiding the man who shot him. The brown-haired man who got a new rifle. He took aim, said that's why he likes shooting at long range. Then he smiled and added that it looked like he would use up all the bullets his girlfriend had given him earlier today. The brunette, fortunately, remained unharmed or was lying on the floor when the young man said that he hoped that they had prepared something good for him. The monster man was still trying to get up and find him, calling him a psycho, and the main character continued shooting. All those bullets were flying at him and causing incredible pain. Finally, the blonde man turned around and was able to look straight into the distance. Meanwhile, the young man was watching him through the sight. Then he got up and exhaled. He also turned to his girlfriend and said that she had to watch this, asked if she was wounded. In response, he heard that everything was fine and told her to get some sleep. A search party would arrive soon. The girl began to close her eyes and agreed, while somehow managing to thank him. Some more time passed, and finally they moved to another room. The girl came to and did not understand where she was. Suddenly, someone came up to her and asked if she was awake. Suho was sitting next to her, and they immediately asked him what he was doing here. The guy moved over and asked if she was in pain, said that the doctor had said before that there were no abnormalities, and in response he heard that this was true. But she asked why he was here. And after he answered that all her friends were watching her in turn, she asked why. The guy put his foot on his toe and said that he was also partly to blame for what happened. He also introduced his comrades standing behind the door and added that they should have paid a little more attention, but were busy with something else. After which he stood up and said that he wanted to apologize. The girl turned around and said that he had been told more than once before that he was slow. The guy was surprised and asked again. The brunette had been thinking all this time about what she considered the most important thing, to take first place in the ranking, but it turns out she was wrong. Then she thought about the main character and realized once again that she was wrong. The guys talked for some time. She decided to ask if this guy had arrived. The comrade did not immediately understand who she was talking about, so his girlfriend turned away and said that she was not talking about anyone. Then she looked out the window and thought. The weather that day was surprisingly good. Hajin almost immediately after that received a message from her with gratitude and promises to thank him. He read it and smiled, and then he began to see that his points increased by 457, luck was activated. A bonus of 11% of the points received was provided. Now he was a successful long-range shooter. The sniper skill increased to the 7th level. He sat at the table and thought that he was able to earn so much for one action, which means that they give a good reward for solving one of the main episodes. Then he began to read carefully and thought that investing everything in the sniper skill is not particularly profitable, but he thinks it's not bad because he saved his girlfriend. Someone immediately came up to him and called him. It was Mr. Suhyuk, who said that he was so surprised when they called him and immediately asked what happened. After that, he fell to his knees and said that if he wanted to cancel the contract, he asked him to think about it again, but that was not the case. Then the man looked up and saw a strange suitcase. The young man looked at it and said that he would like to invest in the agency. He was surprised and asked again. The protagonist immediately imagined the ginseng that was at the purple banquet, thought that he earned about 400 million won on it. If 250 million of this was invested in the horse owner and the remaining 150 million in the agency, then it would be quite profitable. Then he thought that he was confident in the growth of both the owner and the agency, so he decided to invest all the money. And when the man heard this, he said that this was a very large amount. He did not even know if he could accept it. True, the guy handed over the suitcase, immediately said that they just need to take this money because he was investing for their overall growth. They need to buy a normal magic pocket and transport for the field. They talked for some time, and when asked how old he was, the man replied that he was 29. The cadet was surprised and said that he was much older than him, so he could address him informally, but in response he heard that he could not talk to the investor like that, so he asked if he could cancel the investment. The agent was surprised, asked again and said that in that case he was ready to switch to an informal style of communication. After which they both left the cafe, discussed the need to go to a 24-hour store. Finally, they went there. Inside, the man asked why he needed a lottery ticket. The brunette turned around and said that he was a minor, so he could not get the winnings without an adult. And while he was checking the ticket, he said that he wanted to test his luck at the same time and also won. He immediately received a question about how much money was there. When the guy answered that there were 20 million won, the agent was surprised and even a little confused. And then it dawned on him how big the sum was. Even on the street you could hear him scream, did he really get 20 million won? After receiving the winnings, the main character handed him the money and said that he also wanted to invest it. It would be better to adjust the contract and send it to him. After deducting taxes, it would be less than 20 million, right? He simply hid the money and bowed to him. It looked a little strange, so he immediately asked what was wrong with him, and the answer was banal. He was afraid that the money would simply be stolen. Finally, evening came. In one of the abandoned buildings, it seemed to be quiet. But a second later, some strange black energy appeared there. And a moment later, a silhouette began to form from this energy. A boy appeared there, who turned to the captain and said that they began to move. Then he came closer and added that the owner of the horse had grown up. What to do next? The captain looked at him and replied that only the item needed to be taken from them, the rest could be left as is. The boy raised his hand and said that he agreed, and added that he noticed something strange. Some guy appeared who bought up the horse owner's shares. He said in surprise that at first it was 300, 1,000, and recently invested 250 million. Isn't that too much for a guild that doesn't even have a personal page? The captain didn't even go down to him and replied that there was no point in thinking about it. It was better to focus on their business. In response, he heard that if he said so, then good. Another thing the boy said was autumn. He almost forgot to say that several interesting pages appeared at the purple banquet. Would he like to take a look? He activated the status window and said that the relic search group, dog soup, and the truth office. This is where his inner instinct tells him that something is wrong with this truth office, and asked if he could place an order with them. Suddenly they would find it. The captain got a little tired and simply turned to him. The boy perked up and listened to him attentively. Then he even got scared and just said he was joking. Then he looked at her and said that midterm exams would start next week in the cube. Suho and Jonghak were in the lead there. He also introduced them and asked how many people would be involved. Would they also take part? The woman stood up and said she would be there too. The boy listened to her attentively, and she came closer, looked straight at him, and when she lowered her head, she said it would be nice if someone capable found it. And then she thought about the main character. Time flew by quickly. The day of the competition came. A sign with a greeting hung in the sky. Finally, midterm exams came. Everyone was ready for this day. There, students could meet their parents, like one of the girls. She hugged her mother and immediately received a question about how she chewed, to which she replied that she just really missed her. During the exam week, the club opened its doors to guilds and associations that were interested in hiring heroes, as well as relatives of the cadets. The types of people gathered from all over the world resembled some kind of festival. There were really a lot of people there. There were reporters below who said that they were currently in the cube. This is the best academy of heroes in the world. Another said that they should call him, asked who is in the top 100. And all this time a drone was flying above them. Someone caught it and said that Junho was there. Someone said that she was his fan. The guy lowered his head and said that he had not been able to film anything special yet. Then he raised the drone up and asked if he should wait a little longer. In his head there were thoughts that this was a modest gift as a token of gratitude from the agent who flew throughout the cube. With it would be much easier to detect if someone tried to invade. Then someone crashed into him. The guy turned around and apologized. And next to him was a dark-haired woman. She also looked into his eyes but did not answer. This made him a little nervous. Then it dawned on him that he almost forgot that she would also be at these exams. It seemed that this character was familiar to him. The guys looked at each other and walked on. Then the young man turned away and thought that he had been looking at her for too long, and looking into her eyes for too long. What should he say so as not to look suspicious? He opened his mouth and began to squeeze something out, and then he told her how beautiful she was. The woman heard this and was confused. The main character almost fell through the ground from there. The captain listened to him, turned around and left. Her silhouette eventually disappeared into the crowd, leaving the guy alone with his shame. In the meantime, she turned to her assistant. Then she lowered her head and said that this guy she had just encountered was looking at her through a visibility blocker. Then she raised her head and said that she needed to check who he was. Not only heroes come to the cube to search for capable cadets, people from the chameleon group are also here, and these thoughts did not leave the young man all this time. Their goal is to recruit the 2 strongest cadets. He immediately introduced his comrades and realized that the first one's beliefs did not coincide with their policy, so they would not take him. According to the plot, take a closer look at the second one and go back. Then he frowned and thought that penetrating the chameleon group's cube itself did not pose a threat. But if the plot changed, the hero guarding the examination field would enter into a fight. It would not end with 1 or 2 victims. Immediately, someone there began to scream, thereby attracting all attention to himself. One of the cadets then smiled and said that he did not see a single suspicious person. And the girl came up to him and said that he should stop shirking. It would be better to watch properly. What will become of the hero's reputation if during the exams about the security in the cube? They were Oh Jun-hyuk, 1737th place in the ranking, a hero of the 6th rank, who said that it would be necessary to simply deal with the violators before it entailed problems, and Seo Yomji, 2000th place in the ranking, a hero of the 7th rank. The guys were walking around the square and discussing how the young man made everything sound so easy and simple, but he suddenly interrupted her and suggested that they just go eat pizza. Someone was watching them at that moment, smiled and said that the main character saw the captain despite the siren necklace. Then he went ahead and said that his appetite was starting to wake up. Before that he thought that he would have to return empty-handed. And he asked who it was. He wanted to find him first and fight, but the kid inside just got angry and said that it was a mountain mouse and ordered him to calm down. The man paid attention when they told him that she could check everything without his intervention. The battle would begin soon. Indeed, at that moment, people had already gathered on the second battlefield. Finally, the host came out and said that today at 9 AM the first fight would finally take place. Their correspondent was sent to the scene. The first competition would be held using. The main character was walking somewhere nearby at that moment. Suddenly, someone shouted at him and attracted attention. There was a brunette standing there, whom he had saved before, and asked if he was really going to the arena. The young man turned around and said that he had his first competition. For some reason this surprised her. Well, she immediately called her assistant, who appeared next to the suitcase in a moment. And she said that there were 1,000 high-quality bullets, all lying neatly next to each other. The girl handed him the suitcase and said that they would not be used during the exam, but perhaps they would come in handy later. If needed again, he could ask for it. And when the guy took it, she added that by the way, she was not trying to thank him for saving her life. She looked at him and said that it was just a gift. There was a dialogue between the guys. What else? She was being called to be a witness regarding the case with the monster man, but she still hadn't said that this was the man who shot then. In response, she heard a request to keep it a secret. The guy was a little confused and thought that if they found out that he had shot, he could have problems, so he had to be more careful. The girlfriend then came closer and said that she knew that he had a reason to hide his powers, so it would be difficult for him to pass this exam. In response, she received a question whether he was hiding his powers. The young man was surprised when he received the question whether he had seen his opponent. Meanwhile, all the others had gathered in the cadets' waiting room. One of them was actively training and preparing for a fight, so actively that sweat was pouring down his face. This was his new enemy, who was preparing for a bat and said that he would smash the main character. The captain's assistant was studying the documents at that time and said that there was nothing special about it. He raised his head and said that the person who was told to check grew up in an orphanage. No parents, no relatives. At the age of 6 he discovered special abilities, after which he went to study at a military school, was average, did not stand out in any way, and then entered the cube. The woman stood and listened that there was still a debt of 300 million won. That's all. Then she remembered their meeting and thought how he could see her through the visibility blocking object. The boy answered her that he didn't know either. At the same moment a man appeared there who finally found her. He smiled and said that the two hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was a member of the chameleon group, Jin Jiao. The girl turned around and said that he was late here. He hoped that no one had turned off anywhere on the way. In response, she heard why he was doing this. He was diligently looking for talented cadets, as ordered before. Then a question came about the report. The man raised his hand and said that there was no report, all weaklings who would fly away with one blow. And the boy suddenly intervened and said that this was natural, asking if there were any unusual cadets. To the answer he heard that he didn't even know. He looked at the best second-year cadet and was disappointed. The boy replied that this year's first-year students really stand out. We need to look there. Just in time for the Hajin duel to begin, the man looked up and asked again about the name. Then he looked at the captain and said that it was probably the one who saw her through the visibility blocker. Meanwhile, in the arena, everyone was already preparing for the fight. Even the students gathered in the stands and bought all sorts of food. They discussed that there were a lot of good memories there, and the girl replied that they were more bad than terrible. He said that he would not watch the fight because he had recently gotten it. But the guy replied that he was already much better and his son loved competition so much. She smiled and asked again, but then she noticed something. A strange man, unknown to them, was sitting in the stands opposite. The woman raised her hand and said that he was looking at them and smiling. Maybe he was their fan. And it was a member of the chameleons who were watching them. Then the guys got distracted and noticed that the first opponent had entered the battlefield. The fight was beginning. It was the fighter Horak, 19th place in the cadet ranking. He has good abilities. The girl was surprised and said that his opponent was quite an unexpected character with 934th place. It was the main character, who was already ready for the battle. There was very little space between the two of them. A question came up: did you pass the written test well? After which the guy smiled and said that it was written on his face how he thirsted for blood, so it was better to hit lighter. And the opponent said nothing, only prepared for the battle. The main feature of this man was self-defense by dispersing magic. He would be lucky if he did not break him in half. And he is not talking about some bullets, because this man looked terrifying even without a weapon. There is no way he can be allowed to approach him. At the same time, the commentator said that now it was time for the exam tests for freshmen. The guys got ready and said that the first duel begins right now. Horak immediately accelerated and ran towards the enemy. Then he swung and was ready to deliver the first blow, and the young man looked at him and sent a laser there. It was time for the bullet. He fired and thought that the duration of this skill had increased greatly. Then he grouped himself and thought that he would be able to follow his movements for 1 minute. A second later, Horak smashed the floor right next to him with his fist. The guy flew up and thought that the enemy was rushing like a tank, and he was really very expansive. He literally destroyed everything in his path. The brunette did nothing but run away from him. Then he took out his gun and began to aim. When he fired, the enemy's fist was right in front of him and stopped the bullets. Horak smiled and thought that the boy was an idiot. Does he think he can penetrate his self-defense? Then he stretched his hand towards the bullet and thought that some bullet would just bounce off him. But he didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to redirect it. Thus, the defense was penetrated. Everyone around was very surprised by what was happening. They did not understand how this weak opponent penetrated his self-defense. Meanwhile, the opponents continued to be on the battlefield. Horak understood his head and heard how everyone was discussing who he was and how he did it with ordinary bullets. Then he looked at the boy, who had remained calm all this time, but he was holding his shoulder and could not cope with his own anger. Suddenly, the rest of the bullets flew straight at him. Each of them pierced his defense and brought him incredible pain. Hajin then came closer and thought that his opponent assumed that the bullets would bounce off him. What a pity, these are special bullets that are made with the magic of Sigmata. They have the power of a demon. Then he stretched out his hand and made a control shot. Some of the observers were shocked, some were happy, and they did not jump up and began to shout in a crowd. But Horak gathered his last strength and got angry. Then he smashed the floor with his fists and began to insult his opponent. The blast wave was so strong that the floor began to collapse throughout the stadium, and thus the wave reached the main character, who managed to jump in time and avoid the blow. He then fired and shouted that he should be careful because a sword was flying at him. However, the opponent realized this at the last second when he saw him in front of his eyes. Nevertheless, he was able to dodge and thought that maybe the sword had some kind of device. Meanwhile, the young man approached him with a gun and said that the sword was not real. Immediately after, he fired and once again inflicted damage on his opponent. While he was lying on the ground, Hajin came closer and looked at him. Complete silence reigned around. Finally, the cadet pulled out his gun again and prepared to shoot. Even in the stands, people were shocked and froze from what was happening. The guy pulled the trigger and nothing happened. Horak raised his head and looked ahead. The spectators were generally in shock. Also the onlookers, who shouted whether the student really ran out of bullets, but his opponent was no longer at all. The main character was still standing in place when his opponent got up. He looked at him and became very angry, but the guy stood motionless and did nothing. Then he smiled. Then he raised his hands and said with a smile that he surrendered. Horak was very surprised. The same thing happened to the spectators. A moment later, the commentator announced that the fight was over and the tournament table appeared on top. Horak was declared the winner, who was literally burning with anger at that moment. After that, Hajin simply turned around and left, while his opponent was stopped by other people. Horak did not even hear when the doctor came up to him and started asking if he was definitely hit by a real bullet because he was whole, maybe because he was a fighter. The adults in the stands also asked what their impressions of the heroes were. The woman then closed her eyes and said that this boy was great. His opponent was too clumsy. He used self-defense, which requires more energy. Although he could have gotten by with a slow attack on his own, he tried to show himself in all his glory in a short time, and as a result he disgraced himself. Then she frowned and added that she was more worried about the boy. Memories of this battle immediately appeared in her head and she said that fast shooting is beyond common sense, the ability to follow the enemy's movements with the whole body. But at some point Horak began to move slower, so he slowed down too. Maybe this is a special ability to improve his physical abilities. Then she was surprised and said that he compressed his magical power and shot him. The man turned and asked with a smile if he really wanted to say that the cadet compressed his mana so much that he was able to break through self-defense. Really? The girl then simply smiled and said that she did not know what kind of abilities he had. Maybe he drank doping. People in the stands, meanwhile, were shouting that the guy really did break through self-defense with a shot. They need to call the director right now. There is a high probability that he will become the best in history. For some time, the heroes discussed that he should be remembered, and the next competition began. A member of the chameleon group then simply scratched his ear and said that he did not like this guy. He walked outside the stadium and added that some pot-bellied little thing was holding his pistol and was just waiting to shoot. Why did the boss tell him to take a closer look at him? The kid answered that he really hadn't seen it. He had the power of a demon. The man continued to walk forward and said, "What kind of demon? What does it have to do with power?" But the spirit only got angry and said that he just didn't like that the fighter was at a long distance, and that was it. After which the brown-haired man smiled maliciously and said that only such a battle can be called a real fight when you are burning with a desperate desire to plunge death into the enemy's heart. And then he thought about it when he heard that they told him to take a closer look at the cadets who had this desire, reminded him of the two cadets, and he said that they both showed themselves well. Then he remembered their battle and said that the blonde, impressed with his spear technique, he aimed straight at the enemy's vital organs without preliminary preparation. Then he said that he also liked how he treated cowards who only did what they defended themselves. In response, he heard that if he liked it, nothing good can be expected from his character. The boy was surprised when he heard that Suho behaved rather unusually and even asked again. And the man imagined their duel and said that as he heard, he uses a sword technique similar to a dance. It is clear that his movements are very precise and polished by long training. But he had a feeling when he saw how that guy won and his strange look. The man suddenly thought and said that he had a feeling that this cadet was hiding his true face. A dialogue took place between him and the child. It seems that the best cadet of the cube is different from the others. He did not even know these two are not the ones he would like to fight right now. And when he received a question about Hajin, he got angry and asked if they really noticed this idiot too. The boy answered that of course, the boss was looking for the power of a demon, although the man did not like this guy at all. Suddenly a security guard came across him and asked who was there. The employee also said that outsiders were not allowed into this forest. They had to leave immediately. The group member turned around and said that there were too many annoying flies here. And when he shouted that they had to leave, he said that everything that was happening really annoyed him. Then he swept the cap off his head, and a second later he gave him such a flick that the poor security guard flew away. And the blow was so strong that even the birds flew in different directions. And it seems that his head was torn apart from this. The boy immediately understood what happened and asked if the man really smashed his head. He smiled and answered that it was so. Then he said that he didn't give a damn, the captain would just tear him apart, and in response he heard that if he didn't tell, he wouldn't tear him apart. Evening came. Meanwhile, the captain was standing somewhere on the roof of the building and watching the sunset. In her head, she was thinking about that very day when it was raining. There was a grave in front of her and the words were said that she would definitely find this traitor. The girl was desperate then, promised the dead man that she would find him. Then she raised her head and with tears in her eyes said that she would avenge him. Now from these memories her hands were shaking. The woman lowered her head and turned to her assistant. Then she looked down and said that it was necessary to check these three cadets. To the question of who would be first, she answered that the power of the demon can break the magical power, so Hajin will be first. The assistant said that he agreed. But will everything be okay? There is very little information about him, however, it was not important to her. The woman introduced the guy and said that tomorrow she would meet him in person. The second day of midterm exams came, people gathered at Stadium Number 1. There were different characters, even recruiters from the Sword Guild were noticeable, the creator's fortress claim also came. The spectators were happy, and they discussed that compared to the first day, a big difference was visible to you fans, of course, because today will be a hot battle. There appeared a table with the cube rank, Suho in first place against Yohei in 8th place. Also Rachel in 3rd place against Naeun in 4th place. The guys were actively discussing that they were waiting for this battle, the first competition between girls, right? The main character was also watching all this and then mentally thanked the fans for the explanation. He looked at the girl and thought that today she was destined to lose to the blonde completely, because it was simply impossible to defeat her with a bow that did not suit her. When both were in the ring, the commentator said that now the competition between the freshmen began. This was already the 8th battle. Finally, the fight began. Naeun smiled and offered to change places in the ranking today, turning to the blonde and pulling the bowstring. Then she shot straight at her. Immediately, her energy spread everywhere and flew to her opponent. At that moment, the blonde raised her head and saw a bright light above. Then she began to skillfully dodge all these projectiles and run to her opponent. A second later, another arrow appeared above her head. And surprisingly, the girl was able to break it right in the air. Naeun saw this and was very surprised. And then she realized that her opponent was approaching her right. At that moment, one of the fans was coming down the stands. It was a brunette with long hair. Hajin noticed her and was surprised. The same captain sat down next to him and looked straight into his eyes. It was the woman who was wanted by the Hero Academy, the leader of groups with a bad reputation, a strong warrior who hides behind many names, and now she was sitting right in front of him. When the guy looked at her, he thought that in this world only he knew her real name. A second later, a glass of Coca-Cola flew at her head, not letting her say a word. There was a fan who simply stumbled and asked how this happened, also asked if everything was okay, Bopros. The horror that the main character experienced at that moment, words cannot even describe. After some time, information appeared on the screen that Rachel was the winner of the fight. The woman at that moment sat and lost her face. Then she was a little confused and thanked the young man for the scarf. In response, she heard nothing. She turned away and said that she saw his battle with the cadet yesterday. Then she handed him an envelope and said that she preferred to watch from the shadows. The skill that he showed at the competition was that his ability. In the envelope there was a business card with her phone number and name. The young man took it and thought that it was probably one of her fictitious names, asked if he understood correctly that this was a member of the guild, but he was not allowed to contact them until the end. When the woman tried to take the business card, she immediately heard that it was not said that he would not take it. At that time, the next duel was going on. The brunette said that she could not go into details yet, but in any case, the cadet would not lose anything. Then she got up and said that she had to go. She hoped that she would receive a call from him. After which she turned around and left, and the young man thought what was the point of the leader contacting him now. While he was thinking about why she came, he saw a sword flying right in the sky. At that very second, they announced that the winner was Cadet Suho, who was very happy about his victory. At the exit, everyone was only discussing this fight and saying that the guy was amazing. But the girl lost to the blonde. For the first time they saw Korean rising stars lose to foreigners. Hajin, meanwhile, lowered his drone. He looked at it and thought if he managed to film anything, he should go back to the dorm and check. Then he heard strange sounds that attracted his attention. It turns out that it was his friend, who was sitting in the bushes and crying. He was surprised and thought that he remembered this incident. The girl was very sad because of the loss, and Suho, who was passing by, tried to console her. This picture immediately appeared in his head, and the thought that after this she would become interested in him. That's why he was looking at her now and thinking that he had to try and she would succeed. He had to try to cope together. To be honest, such consolations wouldn't help her now. There are times in life when you just have to give up. Then he imagined his main character in the book and thought that, however, he didn't have such a word in his dictionary. He didn't advise anyone to give up and he didn't do it himself. The girl was still crying while he was thinking that maybe it was because of him that Naeun didn't give up the bow. And then it dawned on him. She had a bracelet on her hands that was shining brightly. At that moment, a message came from Hajin with the message that he saw the competition. The girl asked who this idiot was. Then she looked up and was even more surprised. The messages said that he was right, a sword suited her better than a bow, maybe it was not too late. And in the next message, he advised her to change direction. Naeun read it and was very surprised. At that very second, she was found by a comrade who shouted that it had finally happened, and why was he hiding at all? He came closer and said with a smile that he had been looking for her for so long. Why was she sitting alone? The little girl turned and looked at him with incredibly angry eyes, and then she pounced on him and started calling him a bastard, screaming that they would finish him off now. That's how the end of the combat competitions of the midterm session of the first semester went. That day, the protagonist decided to watch the recordings from the drone and saw a man who was found by a guard in the forest. Then this man destroyed the guard with one click, smashing his head. He watched it closer and in a new way. Then he removed his hand from the keyboard and for some time tried to comprehend what was happening. He was overcome by fear. The only thought was that this was a cruel sight. Then the young man looked again at this man and assumed that he was also from the chameleon group. He imagined him and realized that without any hesitation he kills people, as if he does it for pleasure simply because he thirsts for blood. There are people in this world who are capable of such things. If you imagine a city, life has become much more comfortable thanks to scientific magic, behind which half humans were hiding, not bound by morality and laws. Although they were people, but they accepted heroes, they could not be called ordinary criminals, because they had unusual powers. Like heroes, they were villains. The guy continued to look at this and thought that initially, according to the plot, villains and negative characters were not worth much attention. But in the new version with the author, the plot changed. Now he did not know which characters would play negative roles. The day of the practical exam of the midterm session came. Everyone moved to the examination field to fight the monster. There they were met by a woman who said that she was very glad to see them, introduced herself and said that she was a magician who would conduct the exam. To begin with, she decided to briefly tell about it. In front of them is the examination field. It looked like a large field of virtual reality. On it you can fight a hologram monster that the magicians will call. She took a step forward and added that this exam was quite dangerous, unlike the training lessons that had been held so far. The summoned hologram monster had exactly the same attack power as the real one, and even if the wizard stopped summoning, it would not disappear immediately. The guys were scared when they heard that excessive pride could put their lives at risk, so if they had any difficulties during the exam, they should immediately report their surrender. She also looked at them and said that the exam would be assessed based on how quickly and how coolly they made decisions, and wished them all to show their best side and pass the exam. Then the spotlights turned on and the woman added that everyone would enter in fours, starting with the first team. The guys entered the ring and the commentator said that the guys in the first team should get ready. After which the girl snapped her fingers and said that she asked the others to listen carefully. Then she pointed her hand forward and added that those who had not yet reached their turn should analyze the battle of the other cadets. The guys immediately activated their status windows and listened to what they needed to watch carefully how others fought monsters and what mistakes they made. If they had a better way, they could write it down. Then she folded her hands and said that now, something confused her and made her think. after which the teacher said to turn off their smart watches. The students did so. The wizard also added that their reviews would affect the grade, so they should take the recording seriously. One of the students for some reason got angry when she heard this, after which the teacher looked up and said that they would now begin the battle with the monsters. Then the seal was pressed and the summoning began. Everything around began to shine and sparkle. A moment later, a monster, an advanced ghoul, appeared in front of the first student from the first team. He immediately flew towards the girl and tried to strike. Fortunately, the blonde managed to parry the blow and hit him with her sword. Everyone outside the ring saw only rising dust. The guys watched very carefully and analyzed everything that was happening. The second team began. A huge snake appeared in front of them. The young man swung and shouted that he had decided to use magic release. And then, with the help of an electric charge, he struck his opponent. The exam was over. Finally, it was the third one's turn. Her powers were also quite bright. The opponent was a huge unicorn monster, at which her magic arrows flew. It was quite easy and the exam was quickly over. It was the brunette's turn. She struck the monster with her rods. Another cadet dealt with it thanks to water and a sword. Screams, cries, and the sounds of blows were heard around. It was the turn of the 10th team, which had to prepare for the exam. This team included Hajin, who got a chrome wolf. The guy started shooting at him, and then he hid behind a rock, but it seemed that the shooting was unsuccessful. Then he turned around and thought that if this continues, he will finish without problems, because he still wounded him. But suddenly the space around began to change. The other cadets watched and did not understand what was happening. When the guy raised his head, he saw something from above, and in his ear he heard a strange sound. Another cadet also turned around and asked what happened on the examination field. The space around him changed. But in response, he heard from his comrades that he needed to focus on security, apologized, and got to work. Meanwhile, the woman was watching them through the screen and asked if he knew that the guard who patrolled the cube yesterday was killed. Then she looked at the exam records and said that this was an emergency, so he needed to keep an eye on it. The man answered that he agreed and asked if she had found the source of the vibrations that had just been there. He was walking along the beach and in response to his colleague believing that there was something in his direction, but the exact location was still unknown, he said that he hoped that nothing serious would happen. Thus, the man reached some kind of forest. Suddenly, something appeared behind him. There was a man who approached him and asked what was going on. Then he scratched his head and said that it seemed that this man was trying to interfere. The hero turned around and said that outsiders are not allowed here, maybe he got lost. After which he was asked why he was here then and with a changed face said that he was not an outsider. The man rolled up his sleeves and said that in that case he understood everything. Then he smiled sarcastically and added that they should stop blocking his way, they should leave if they did not want to get it. The hero simply remained silent and took out his sword. Suddenly, something started shaking behind them. Both turned around and did not understand what was happening. The water seemed to start bubbling, and then it gathered in a huge whirlpool and it was unclear what it was, but there was clearly someone inside. The same earthquake was happening on the battlefield for the students. Everyone started running away from there when the commentator said that the exam was temporarily stopped due to an unforeseen situation outside the examination field. They asked all the cadets to leave the examination field. A teacher stood above, who announced to the 10th team to stop and run outside. The main character looked up and thought that things were bad, but did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, another woman appeared there. The guys were still hiding behind the rocks because the monster was still there. The young man raised his gun and thought why the call had not been cancelled. Then he looked up and tried to shout to them, but there was no one there. So he lowered his hands and thought that this could not be just a random mistake, maybe there was a monster person among the magicians. He immediately began to scroll through the teacher's speech in his head and thought that it was definitely not her, because he did not receive a notification about the change in settings. No, there were no characters in this examination field whose settings had been changed. But suddenly something occurred to him. The guy turned around and thought that he now understood something. At that moment, the woman had already reached one of the cadets. She looked at the blonde and said that she had not seen the Spring Princess for a long time. The girl looked at her with frightened eyes, and the main character's thoughts were that this was quite possible, because in the book there are many biotic characters who never appeared in the story. It turned out that it was not a woman who appeared, but Sir Lancaster. This story, the author of which is unknown. The ceiling began to collapse at that moment. The girl raised her head and turned to this man, asked where he had been all this time after that incident in London, and added that his appearance had changed. The man was just looking at her. Then he raised his eyes and smiled. The girl saw this and seemed to get even more scared, after which she concluded that this man had sold his soul. Then she came closer and asked how that was possible, since he had always been the commander of the guard in the royal palace. In response, she heard that she had not expressed herself quite accurately. The man came closer and said that he had not sold his soul, the new owner had simply picked it up after he, who was ready to sacrifice his life for the fatherland, was betrayed and thrown out. The sword in her hand was shaking as well as her hands at that moment. But nevertheless, the girl picked it up and said that it seemed useless to talk to him, it was necessary to arrest him. Then she took off and flew forward. The girl swung her weapon in mid-air and tried to strike. But surprisingly, the man simply took a step to the side and was able to dodge. And then she noticed something very strange. The blade passed through his body, but did not cause any damage. The blonde man himself came closer and said that he was very sorry, but the body was not here, but in another place, and what he saw in front of him was just entertainment. Then he imagined the people running away and said that there was chaos outside now, so no one cared what was happening here. Various monsters had penetrated the examination field, so there was complete chaos now, no one would come to her aid. He also lowered his head and added that everything here was very different from Britain, where members of the royal family were protected first and foremost and no one cared how many people would die for this, right? The little girl just listened to him and said nothing. Memories of a terrible bloody battle immediately began to emerge in her head. When a little girl was lying in a man's arms, covered in blood. Tears were pouring down, it was too late to do anything, this damn place did not let go of their memories. And now they were standing opposite each other and were about to fight. Sir raised his head and said that he would like to talk more, but he had little time. Then he turned around and said goodbye to the princess. The girl immediately tried to stop him. And at the last second she saw how his body literally dissolved into thin air. Someone else immediately appeared in his place. It was a man without a face, fully armed. He also tore off and flew forward. The girl did not even have time to notice or think about anything. But, fortunately, she took out her blade in time and was able to protect herself from the blow. It was very difficult. She thought that this was a ruthless fencing technique. The blows were so strong that she was thrown back. A wound also appeared on one hand, and then on the other hand. The blonde felt unwell and understood that it was difficult for her to fight, so she would not defeat him. She had to take a risk and wait for the moment when he was distracted. But it was as if this moment did not exist and all the movements were very abrupt. Then a sword flew at her hand, the weapon flew to the side, and when the little girl found herself on the floor, she did not even have a means of defense. Now the situation was such that victory was clearly not hers. But at that very second, some thread wrapped around her hand. It was a thread between her hand and her blade. When the enemy tried to attack again, her weapon flew straight towards him. A bright light appeared in that room, and then there was an explosion as if the ceiling began to collapse. The blonde got up and did not understand what was happening. There, in the distance, someone's silhouette appeared in the wall. The monster also turned around and silently looked back. Then he grabbed his blade and took off. He ran with all his might, planning to attack this person. But then a shotgun appeared in his hands and the transformation of the desert eagle occurred. It was the main character, who turned on the shotgun mode and was going to save his girlfriend. He immediately shot his opponent and thus broke half the walls there. Finally, silence hung in the room. The young man took a step forward and looked around. After that, he looked at his weapon and thought, could he really win with one shot? It cost him 250 points in vain. All this time, a blonde was standing behind him, who did not understand what was happening. She raised her head and thought that this person saved her. It turns out that this is her classmate. The brown-haired man was already moving towards her at that moment. Then he extended his hand and asked if everything was okay. The baby did not look like she was okay and looked at him with frightened eyes. Then the guy said that he had a bandage. Some time passed, but the bandages were not changed and the wounds were not treated. The main character tried very hard to help her and said that if he had been even a little late, she would never have been able to pick up a sword again. Then he looked at the bandage and did not understand what was happening. Then he realized that it was the precious blood of the cube ranker. The blonde then stood up and thanked him. In response, he received a question about what to thank for. At that very second, the light came on again, and employees appeared from above who turned to them and asked if anyone was hurt. Then the woman said that she would now send a rescue team to them. The guys stood up and began to wait. At that moment, another employee approached the person in charge and said that 2 cadets were seriously injured in the next room. She turned around and asked who had arranged all this. The hero who was guarding this place was on the beach at that moment. A friend ran to him and I turned to him. After which she leaned over and asked what happened. Did a monster really appear? But in response she heard that it was very fast, although it had already been driven away. The woman was surprised and asked what did they mean by driven away, did he really do it himself? But he said that it was not so, someone else had driven him away. After which she imagined the battle and said that he did not know because of whom exactly, but it was a very angry monster, and that man drove away such a monster with his own efforts, simply by striking it. He remembered what he looked like and said that it was a very strong warrior. The girl asked in surprise if he really wanted her to believe it, and the guy said that he himself did not believe it. In short, it seems that this is a suspect in the murder of a policeman, we need to find him. Then he raised his head and said that an unknown warrior and the appearance of a high-ranking monster is a complete failure of the exam session. He also added that it would be difficult for the Cube administration to avoid responsibility by introducing their head office. If we go straight to the conclusion, the incident that happened before with the monsters in the Cube became hot news all over the world. Everyone was discussing it heatedly, and the exams were postponed. The Cube staff was busy with this incident and the restoration of the school, so the exams and classes were temporarily cancelled. This was announced to the students at a general meeting. So the cadets found themselves on a 10-day vacation, which had never happened before. Everyone was just happy with this news. The guys were sitting at their desks, rejoicing when the teacher shouted that they were bastards, not even thinking about their comrades who suffered, asked them to stop chatting and return to the dorms. Suddenly, the main character heard that he had received some kind of notification. He took out his laptop, finally received a message about changing the settings, and thought that this was the damn co-author doing it. There was information about Sir Alex. Another author decided to strengthen the attachment to the family that died in the accident, increase the likelihood of an attack on Rachel in the event of an exacerbation of the feeling of anger. Do not wait for the accumulation of strength, change in potential strength 7.5.8.5 to install as a dangerous character. The young man immediately imagined this hero and thought that this is one of the characters from Britain, which he created before. His goal was to arrange a coup in his country, but this negative character became stronger and appeared earlier than he should have according to the plot. Now he seriously tensed up and thought that if he had known about this in advance, he would have come up with more positive heroes. Then he lowered his head and thought that, however, there was not only bad news, but for example, he was able to get magic blood. Then someone pushed him right on the head. The young man turned around and saw a friend behind him. She stuck her tongue out at him and asked why he was looking at her, and he was confused and remembered how he recently suggested that she throw a bow. The guys who were standing aside noticed that the two were arguing again, but their relationship looked better than before. While the girl was leaving, one of them asked if he had no eyes and couldn't notice obvious things. The girl finally returned to her room. When she came in, she called him a pathetic idiot and asked why he was picking on her if he couldn't do anything. Then she received a notification on her watch and asked what was going on. It was her grade for the exam. When the girl sat down, she decided to see who wrote what. Even Suho added something there. Suddenly, she was surprised by a notification that she had gained faith in herself. Her friend was writing at that moment that it seemed like she had a lot of thoughts in her head, many internal and external factors affecting her self-esteem. Then he introduced the girl and added that she was an excellent archer and had many abilities. Her steadfastness shown in the battle with the monster, as well as continuous efforts and talent, could achieve good results. He also wrote that someone said that her abilities were not enough, but it was not true. She did not lack talents, but faith in herself when he watched her fight. The young man wrote all this with a smile, added that if his friend would believe in herself more and move only forward, then I am sure she would become the best hero. And now, in real time, she was counting all this, having read to the phrase that the assessment was conducted by Cadet Suho. The little girl even lowered her head and said that she was embarrassed. She blushed and thought that no matter what anyone said, she was a good archer. Then there was another message only from an anonymous person. I don't know who tried so hard, but there was a lot of text here. The girl smiled and asked what this person wrote there. Some time passed while reading. Her head literally began to boil from each new line, and a vein swelled on her neck from anger. The scream from her room after this comment was such that it could even be heard in the corridor. The girl was very angry and screamed that she would not leave it like this and would find the one who wrote it. If you move to the room to Hajin, there he was busy with the seed. He put it on the princess's blood and waited for some kind of reaction. Then he lowered his head and asked if it worked. Was the seed able to absorb the princess's blood? After which he imagined a witch and thought that if the seed obtained on the mountain is watered with human blood, a witch will be born. He sat down and said that this is the blood of Rachel, a kind girl, so the witch will certainly not be a villain. Then he touched it with his finger and said that he needs to grow up quickly to help him. Not suddenly, something happened. A bright light appeared there. The young man lowered his head and asked what was happening. Did the second stigmata really appear right now? A bright amazing seal appeared on his hand, after which a loud scream that could be heard even on the street. The next day came. This seal had to be hidden with a bandage so that no one would see, and the pain was simply incredible. While the young man was driving somewhere with the agent, the latter turned around and asked what had happened to him. He had a bad expression on his face, and in response he heard that he was just a little tired today. And the guys drove on, discussed how trade was going. It had become much easier with a car, there were more customers, and it was safer than before when you had to walk. The man also almost burst into tears and said that it was all thanks to the main character. The agent thought that it was necessary to change the topic of the conversation. So he looked out the window and asked why there were so many people at the entrance. They had strange bandages on their hands, perhaps they were members of some guild. But the people around them looked at them in surprise and offered to look at them. All these people were members of the guild against the entity. They looked really cool. And at the head was a brunette we knew. The young man looked out the window and thought, did they really come here to inspect the field? Then the guys turned around and noticed him in the distance. The girl came closer and knocked on the window. Then she leaned over and asked what the matter was. The guy looked out and said he wanted to pick up the money. The question immediately came up whether he had really come alone, so he pointed to his escort and said that it was his agent and introduced him. The girl looked in and said that she understood everything. If you think about it, these two would make a rather strange combination, like a mouse and a snake. Initially, this man was supposed to become Suho's agent, and the brunette found out that he had signed a contract with him and decided to invest a large sum of money in their company, even visiting the office. As a result, they had great success and a favorable future. The shares began to rise in price, but this is in accordance with the plot of the book. Only now the question is whether the company without Suho is valuable for this lady to invest money in or not. Even the agent was a little confused then, and the young man's thoughts were that in the worst case, it could happen that because of him, the agent's future would be at risk. At that moment, there was an awkward silence in the car. The brunette moved back and said that she understood everything. Then she pulled the handle of the car, after which she got inside and said that if they came to hunt, she decided to join. Then she turned around and asked the guy if he was against it. After some time, the car was already moving through the forest. The guys were riding inside and just silent. While the brown-haired man was looking out the window and wondering what was on her mind, the girl raised her head and asked her to listen. Then she turned around and asked if they had already decided what they would do in the future, and the young man was surprised and asked what kind of unexpected questions these were. So they walked their way through the forest, discussing what he was asking what he would do after graduation. The main character answered that it was graduation and still far away, and why worry about it in advance? She was surprised by this, how in advance the midterm session was over, and because of the practice in the third year there would be little time to spend in the queue. Then the guy had the thought that in the third year he would have little time because of the practice. And then the girl asked an unexpected question: if there were no special plans, would she like to join the Essence Straight? If you imagine these two guilds, of course they still concede the mercy of the creator to the guild, but if he becomes the leader, he will make the Essence Straight the best guild in the country. She also said something that surprised even the agent, that she could promise to provide high-class weapons, as well as a good agent who would provide any assistance. Then she smiled and added that she thought it was a pretty good offer, right? The guy turned around and said that contact with agents before graduating from school was illegal, a fine of 500 million for that, but in response he heard that she was ready to pay that kind of money without any problems. And then she said that he should think about it, and then the car ran into some kind of stone and the girl hit her forehead right on the front seat. Then it moved away and she asked the man what was going on, why brake so abruptly. But it turned out to be very simple, they just arrived at the respawn point. This is the place where monsters are reborn. The question immediately came up, what was it about, and how could an ordinary agent know where monsters are reborn?